Well, it's great to be here today with Reverend Chris Lee, also known as the Instagram vicar, and a few other things you're also known as that we'll get to in the interview. Chris, it's a privilege to have you here. Been really looking forward to this. As I say, I've seen you pop up in my Instagram feed last couple of years, and you must get ribbed about this constantly. There's a really important side to your public profile, and I've been really looking forward to having you here with us today. So thanks for taking part in this. And as Chris, as this is a kind of oral history, for the record, could you tell us your date of birth and where you were born?
Sure. I was born in the Rotunda Hospital in Dublin on the 25th of the 12th, 1982. So Christmas Day, 1982 in Dublin. And I'm an identical twin. So my brother Charles and I were born together on Christmas Day. He was born a minute before me and loves to tell me that all the time. So yeah, we were born then.
Wow. So you have an older twin by 1 minute and completely identical, yeah?
Yeah, identical twin, yeah.
Gosh. And did you ever sub for each other at different events in life?
We did, yeah, many times. Yeah, well, I mean, we used to get into trouble with school and girls. School, like I used to go to his class on a Friday. In one of his days, he had full kind of free periods all day. But at our school, you still had to come in if it was free period. So I would go into his class, sit, register with his teacher. So I'm here, and then jump out and go to my class. But didn't do that too many times before. After one of the registrations, his head form teacher said, "Charles, can I have a word, please?" And I was like, "Oh gosh!" And then I was walking along, and he was talking to me, and he knew something was wrong because I was a bit edgy. And I ended up having to confess. I went, "I'm so sorry. So I'm actually Chris. Charles is on his way in. He just got held up and he asked me to sign in." And I was like, "Get here quick." But yeah, so we used to try and get away with stuff and silly stuff as well, like going through customs. I'm not sure how illegal this is, but going through customs as children, we swapped each other's passports. And we'd be like, you go through first. And we'd see if we could get through customs with each other's passports when we were children. And yeah, every time, no one stopped us.
Can you do the Face ID thing on phones and unlock each other's?
Oh phones? Gosh, I haven't tried that. No, I haven't tried that. But
if your brother's ever arrested, the police might need you to unlock it. But,
yeah, well, I've heard that there were twins somewhere that they were criminal, and one of them would do a crime and the other one wouldn't, and they'd always both deny it. Yeah. And because you can't make someone if there's any question of his guilt, you can't prosecute. So they always got away with it. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So before we explore your locations, your accent,
sure,
which ranges considerably in your Instagram posts. When I first listened to you, I thought, is this guy American? So your accent implies that your family didn't stay in Dublin. Can you?
Yeah, so I have a strange accent, and friends and close friends and family rib me for my different words. Apparently I have quite a strong, like almost like I don't want to say it because then it will be highlighted to everyone, but I've got a few words that I say which are strange. And so I grew up in Ireland for 4 years, but we moved to Iowa in America for a year when my brother and I were about 5. And my father is a surgeon, just retired now, but he was getting an MD in a university in Iowa. So we lived out there for a year. And so it's a little bit of a Irish tinge with an American twinge now and again. I've got like hard R's, things like that. And then, we grew up in England most of our lives. So a little bit of a mongrel.
Yeah, my wife is from Newcastle and her family are. And most of the time she sounds like she's from the south of England. But when she's spent any time with her family, she comes back with these strange words. Yeah. Does that happen with you? Do you get together family gatherings and lapse into some Irish words?
Dublin Irish makes me feel quite at home when I hear it. My mother and father speak with an Irish tilt, and they were audibly Irish sounding. But to my brother and myself and my sister, we don't hear that Irish. We don't hear it. but other people do. I'm quite an environmental speaker. Because I obviously, we'll probably go into it in my journey and stuff, but I lived in Africa for a time, and my accent changed a lot when I was in Africa, and it became almost South African sounding. But I get quite affected by the accents around me, so I change and mold with that. And there's something about being, I wouldn't describe myself as a third culture kid, but there is, traveling and moving. When you're young, it does affect, I think, how you sound, because I've got friends who are very much third culture kids, meaning they have no set location where they grew up, and they are very much environmental speakers. Their accent changes and molds. It's kind of a survival tactic, I think, when you're
it must be. It came up in another interview that we had, but understandably as kids, you're fitting in, and also you got your neuroplasticity and the ability to adapt your accent. It's always amazing when I've got friends whose kids sounded thoroughly English. They moved to New Zealand or America, and then the next time you see them a year later, it's like they're bilingual completely. So I could just dwell there for a little minute. You said something about that lilting accent and a feeling of home. So where, when you think, because with that mixture and moving around, is home is it a feeling, is it a place for you?
Gosh, I think a home is less location and more people. So it's so for for where my family is, that's home. And so my family are currently here, obviously in London, my immediate family, wife and children. My parents live in Northamptonshire. And, when you first get married and you go, I'm going home, and, you have to be like, oh, wait, no, I'm going to visit my parents. You have to do that learning of, oh, yeah, that's not this is my first primary home now. And then, you have to then stretch to, I'm going to visit my parents. And there's that kind of distancing that happens when you first get married. So home is where my immediate family are, I'd say. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in terms of an identity of where I'm from, that was always a tough thing, I think, growing up, which my brother and I had to get used to. Like, the confusing thing for us, which my parents, I love them, but I didn't think they had any kind of critique of them just moving us around. They didn't come into their heads, is this wise or not? But they moved us around a few times when we were younger, and we found it difficult to say, are we Irish or are we English? Because we grew up in England, we went to school in England, but all of my family is Irish, and I was born in Dublin. And so it was a difficult thing, I think, for us, and because you get confused. Like, when England play Ireland at football, who do you support? And it's like, oh, funny enough, when England play Ireland at football, my brother and I are much more, we support England football. But when England play Ireland at rugby, that's more difficult, because my grandfather played for Leinster,
Did he?
at rugby, and he also opened the bowling in cricket. Not that Ireland are known as a cricketing nation, but they opened the bowling for Ireland at cricket. So had a very much a sporting kind of identity of being Irish. But yeah, but going back to Ireland, and I've got cousins there and friends, I don't feel Irish when I go there. And the people make you're not Irish. You sound English. You live in England. You are English, and it's a sad truth that it's just how you sound that really that makes the difference. It's like whether you're accepted as Irish or not.
Yeah, gosh. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about your grandparents. If we start there with your family,
Sure.
as your oral history today, could you tell us a bit more about your grandparents?
Yeah. So my mother's side, my grandfather Ernest Bodell, was an amazing man. He died about 15 years ago, and so I was a student when he died, but he had an interesting life. His father was a dentist, I believe, and died when he was relatively young, around 12. And then Ernie, my grandfather, became, in a sense, the head of the house, had to get out, work hard, and earned, he became an accountant, and then became rising up in Guinness, and then became a director at the Peak, where a director of Guinness breweries and Irish, it was called Irish breweries, which ran Guinness and other kind of that out, what's the word I'm looking for, anyway, he ran Guinness and Smithwick's and all of that, and he was very senior in he was a board of directors. And so it was really interesting seeing him as a young kid growing up, and knowing that this man was quite an authority figure, and he would take us around the Guinness factory and when we were kids, and that was really great, and take us out to nice places for lunch, and it was always like, oh, he was a big deal, you kind of knew it. And Mo, his wife, lovely, she was a house mum for a lot of it, and they were a really warm couple and loved spending time with them. And it was a good kind of memories of childhood growing up, having Christmases at Ernie and Mo's, and the gentleness of them as a couple. And then the other side, and Mo's still alive, she's 96, amazing, strong woman. And my other side, my father's side, they got to a huge old age. They've just they passed in the last few years. So my grandfather got to 100, and my grandmother, his wife, got to 96. And so they all got old, apart from Ernie, who passed with cancer. So he was a cloth trader. My other grandfather, my dad's side, he was a cloth trader, took over his father's business and just sustained it, ticked it over, lived a comfortable life, didn't have massive ambitions to develop it, bought his house in cash early and just lived there his whole life, and, would take naps in the afternoon, go back to the factory, make sure it was ticking over, and lived a kind of a good, happy life, and in Dublin, and was successful, but didn't aim for the stars, but kept it going. So interesting lot, and it was always great spending time with them as well, and going back to Ireland for holidays. And we go to a place called British Bay, which is this 4-mile stretch of beach, and we just go there, and there was camper vans and lodges, in a sense, in the sand dunes, and we'd go there often. And my parents once shared that we were actually conceived there over dinner with my wife, and it was her first meeting of my parents, and my mum starts saying where we were conceived, and Jenny, we've been going out for about a month. She was rather intimidated by the whole thing, but anyway, I've now told you. Anyway, so we loved growing up and going and playing on the sand dunes, and my brother and I were always adventurers. We were always outside. Loved to get ourselves muddy and into trouble. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, that moves us nicely onto your parents. So we often find that parents can be quite different temperamentally. Was that true of your parents?
To me, or to each other?
Were they very different of each other?
Yeah, my father is all logic. My mother is all emotion. So in some ways, yeah, they were. Like, my father is wise and a surgeon, very successful. He was very well respected and loved by his staff. He practiced for 30 or 40 years in Kettering General Hospital as a ENT consultant surgeon, and he was the clinical director of Northamptonshire for 15 years. So he was, successful man, and Rotary president, stuff like that, and but all, quite logical. Loved watching my brother and I play sport, really supported us in that. Tore his hair out with us, trying to get us to be more academic and exams, and I think in the end just gave up and just kind of let us be. And my mother, it basically a very loving, all emotional, woman. She was a physiotherapist, and she raised 3 kids, all below the age of three. So I've got an older sister who's 2 years older than my brother and myself. So when we were born, my sister was just over 2, and she had her and twins, and my dad was training as a doctor at the time, so he was just knackered the whole time and out of action, trying to do night shifts in the hospital. And my mother had 3 of us, so she's a saint in what she had to go through with us as children, raising us up. And they didn't come from, there was a bit of financial support from the grandparents, but early on, they were a young couple trying to make ends meet, and my dad was a registrar or whatever. So it was tough for them a little bit at the beginning, but they raised us to the best of their ability. I give them grief now. I'm a parent, and I'm like, I can't believe you guys did this with us. Like, I would never do that with my kids. And I think hindsight, and when you're a parent, you look back and you can critique your family with a bit more 2020 vision, but ultimately they did the best they could, and loved us through our kind of our troubles.
Well, did you how did they meet, your parents?
I think they met, my mother and my dad's sister were friends, and very early when they were children, and then they had a bit of distance for a while. And then I think my dad's best friend ended up dating my mum, and my dad was like, I like that girl, and waited, and then they split up. And my dad's friend, I think, went traveling or something, and that was the moment my dad swooped in and was like, look, Jane, I think you're great. And I think actually won her logically. Basically, what I mean is, he said to her, this is why I think you should be with me, and like just spoke to her, and I think wooed her, and eventually they got together and got married, and and had us all.
So that thing you have, especially when you have kids in the stage of life, and you start to hear words come out your mouth and think, oh, that's just what mum or dad would say. Who do you take after when you think of yourself?
It's funny, my family are we love to analyze each other, and so my all of my family would have an opinion on which one I am. I think funny enough, all growing up, everyone would say I was very much like my mum. And then more lately, people have said, oh, maybe you're like your dad, or my dad has said, oh, you're a bit more like me. But then my sisters criticize him for saying that, because they say it's now that you're quite successful, Chris, that he says that, he wants to see himself in the successes that you have. But I think I would say I am the most split, I think, of a combination of them both. I think my brother is more clearly my dad, and for good and ill, and I am more of a mix. I think I have some of the more emotional content and some of the insecurities that my mum has, but I think I have more of a peaceable wisdom that my father holds as well. So I would say I'm quite a good mix of them both. Definitely, carry some of the frailties of my mother, which are based around insecurity and the thoughts or worries of others, things like that can plague me. But I think there's also I think one of the things I hope that I have that is a really good quality of my father is he often sees the best in people, and doesn't wish ill on anyone, which is a good thing for him. And my mother is very good at when she's living in that fullness place. She's very giving, very generous, very caring. So I think I you get both bits of good and bits of bad, I think, from them both. But I'd say I'm quite an equal split. But the rest of my family, you can see where they are in different ways.
Yeah. I had an experience, walked into a hotel or somewhere I was away teaching about 5 years ago and looked in the mirror and I went, "Hello, Dad."
Yeah.
Realised I'd become the image of my father with no hair. So
I've done that with voicemail, I've been on the voice. I've left myself a voicemail like, "Chris, where's your phone?" or something. Or I've left myself and I've picked it up later and listened to it. I was like, "Why is Charles calling me?" And then I've realised, oh, that's me. It's such a weird, very weird feeling. Yeah.
So Northamptonshire became a place for your childhood. Does that feel like home when you go back there? Did you live there long enough?
I love driving back there from London. I love like getting to the location, knowing it quite well, driving over this little brow of a hill into our village of Little Oakley and being like, oh, this is our place. The cocoon of home. I think one of the things about being a vicar is as well, you're very aware that your home isn't, in the sense, this house isn't mine. It's part of, I'm given it. And there's a difficulty to that sense of still feeling detached, that you can't fully invest in the house because it's not really yours. So when I get over the brow to my parents, that does feel, in a sense, in a weird way, historically our family. And history and those things produce roots, which make you feel like that's yours. So there is a degree of going back to Northampton and having a sense of this is where I grew up and knowing it. But I was ready to leave as well. Like I love London. I love where we live, and for me it's, like I said earlier, it's less about the location being, this, that, and the other. It's more about the community and the people around you. So I feel like this is where my friendships are deep and my family is. So yeah.
I have a little theory about places that you grow up in, that the place, because I'm from Luton and it's the strangest place.
Luton, lovely.
Yeah, lovely place. Because when I go back, it's so utterly familiar, but has radically changed. You know that experience where you go somewhere and you're like, where a lamppost is or a road or a turn, but then suddenly it's changed. It's kind of weird. I don't get that with other places that I've lived, but is it like that when you go back to Northampton? Are you like very familiar, but it must have changed?
Yeah, there's some weird things. I mean, like we grew up, two major houses of my childhood. One house was in a place called Kettering, and in Kettering we grew up in Rockingham Paddocks, and the house was Blenheim House in Rockingham Paddocks. And I going there, I remember as a young child, it was a cul-de-sac and we would skate around the area in the cul-de-sac. We'd do bikes. We'd have a great time with the other kids out on the cul-de-sac area. And then I remember these new houses going up, and I remember this bypass, dual carriageway that was being built. And I remember seeing it, and as a kid being like, oh, wow, they're building this, and it being quite a big thing that they were doing, and an infrastructure that I hadn't really seen until that moment, and going, oh, wow, what's that going to look like? And then over the years, just visiting that and remembering that thought of sitting on the banks of this road being built. And now where it's just this, huge cacophony of houses and buildings, and, it's just everything everywhere. It's interesting to see the trajectory, and still going back, and even today there's more of a detachment now, and in many ways. But that was one memory I remember, sitting on the banks and seeing this road develop, and then driving through it quite, when I go home, and this whisper in my memory, oh, I remember sitting there, and like these big fully formed trees were just planted, and something interesting about that feeling, I suppose.
There is, isn't there? So you're one of 4 siblings. Yeah.
Yeah.
So where are you in the birth order? So we know you've got an older brother by 1 minute.
Yeah, so my family is, yeah, it's a very loud family. It's very loving, very vocal, very, in a way, culturally very Irish in the way that we'd sit at a table and we'd talk about everything. Nothing is off the table. Sex, politics, whatever, in favor, out of favor. You know, for people coming into my family, it's hugely intimidating. And, you know, each of us says that we're the quiet one. So I would say to you, I'm the quiet one. And yet most people think I'm a massive extrovert. But in my family, everyone, you fight for the public domain. And in a community space, you know, you're interested in a conversation if you're interrupting the person talking. And that is, you know, completely opposite to my wife, which is very English, very stop, listen, wait till someone's finished, and then you can go in. But if you do that in my family, you never talk because someone is jumping over you. It's a leapfrog, you know, and sometimes the leapfrog is you're pushing someone down so you can leapfrog them, you know, and it's very much fighting for that public space. So I've got an older sister, Sarah, and she's 2 years older. She's very successful. She's a consultant, orthodontist. She went to university in King's, did very well, and then yeah, has just really carved out a career, consultancy. She set up a whole new kind of practice in Kettering General when my dad used to work. So in a way, he's handed over the reins. She's now working as an orthodontist in that hospital. She originally got a job in Northamptonshire, but then she met her husband, who was actually one of my good friends, John, who I grew up with. John and Sarah got together at my wedding, and so they ended up getting married. And so they actually bought a house in my parents' village. So when we go home now, we've got my parents in, you know, their old farmhouse, and then we've got my sister and her husband in the big rectory. Actually, they live in a rectory, like a vicarage, down the end of the village. So it's nice to have both families there. And yeah, Sarah's consultant, orthodontist. She's got 2 kids, and she's doing well. She's a blonde, beautiful, you know, got Charles and I into a lot of trouble with our friends who were always like, oh my gosh, your sister. And it was actually, we kind of enjoyed it because there was a popularity to having a good looking older sister. Everyone wanted to be like, oh, how's your sister, you know, and chat and, you know, bring you in. Oh, this is the boys with Sarah Lee's sister. And she was an amazing runner, and she was head sports girl for her school. And yeah, so I'm very proud of her and how she's done well, and you know, had a, you know, still carving out a very successful career and raising 2 kids. And then I have a younger sister, Victoria.
Right.
Victoria's 10 years younger. So she felt like a afterthought. I think my dad was pretty shocked. My mum was over the moon. So we were basically, when Victoria was kind of just getting to school, Sarah was moving out to go to university. And then we only spent a few years with Victoria at school because we were 10 years older, you know, and then we were off. So Victoria often says that she feels like an only child. But when it comes to what she's like, she's the loud one. I mean, we are all quite loud and opinionated. So a 10-year younger girl coming into that environment, she had to fight for her space. And she is super intelligent, super articulate. She got a double first from Cambridge. She went straight into a massive law firm called Slaughter and May. First interview, smashed it, wanted her. She then realized that for her life, she didn't want to just become an office, you know, type and lose any sense of family. So she made a move which was really thought out to become an in-house lawyer for a big financial tech firm. And she moved into that kind of job to be in-house so she could control her times, live a much more 9-to-5 life. So Victoria at, you know, 26, 27 became the in-house lawyer. What's her? She's something like head counsel or something for this massive firm. which develops financial software. So if your company's trading on the stock market, they're the ones who do the legality around what that looks like, and they also give you the software to help you move your money. So she's doing very well, and she's just down the road from me. She lives in Holland Park with her fiance, and yeah, she's good. She actually just said she's writing a novel on the side. She's kind of freakily intelligent, and she's very glamorous. She's kind of Cruella de Vil styley. Like she will spend ludicrous money on clothes and fashion, and that's her thing. She loves dressing well. She loves style and clothes, and she's very successful. And yeah, so
sorry, carry on. No, you carry on.
I was just going to drop in about my brother. Talk about my brother. So Charles, finishing, he went to Oxford Brookes, and then he joined the OTC, Officer Training Corps, which was linked with Oxford University, and he did it with them. And then he felt like this was maybe, he says that he just slid in. He just kind of was like, and then he was in. He went to Sandhurst. And when he went to Sandhurst, I went off to Tanzania, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about. But so he joined Sandhurst the same time as Prince Harry. So they were in Sandhurst together, and then trained through that and became an officer. He's been to Iraq and Afghanistan, and he's now a major in the artillery, and doing well. So on paper, my family is rather intimidating. So we've got kind of,
I was going to say,
lawyers, army,
by a bunch of, I was going to joke, underachievers, but what was that like for you? Did you feel any pressure with all this success going on around you?
No, not really. I mean, I'm quite happy. I love what I do, and everyone thought I was going to be the black sheep. I was the one they didn't know what I was going to do. They thought that, they were worried that I would go off the rails, because I was pretty, had that growing up. I wasn't, I was the one who everyone was a bit like, what's Chris going to do? Because they knew I was quite unhappy and angry, and but also kind of an action person, like what is he going to do? Is he going to surprise us and do something crazy? So when I did, I mean, I don't know if you want to go into that yet, but
I will do. I'm going to ask you a bit about that. Yeah. You talk about going off the rails. It's the kind of thing someone with a faith background would say, which leads me on to ask, where did church and Christianity feature for you? Was it part of your childhood?
Yeah, yes and no. So my mother is Christian. My whole family would confess as Christians now, and we all have levels of faith and interaction with that relationship with God. Obviously, mine is I would say probably the most severe and involved, and then there are different levels of how people live out their kind of sense of God in the world. But so that's where we're at now. But growing up, my mum was a Christian. My dad would say, wasn't. He'd see it more as a crutch growing up. So we did the classic, mum took us to Sunday school, and she would go, and if faith was kind of like mum's thing, which she huddled all of us out under a wing to go. And dad wasn't massively invested, but would come at, Christmas and Easter, classic. And then, we got to our teenage years and sport hit, and church just dissolved in the background. And we'd go to rugby yeah, so it was kind of there, and I always remember the stories, and we did Cubs and Beavers and Cubs Scouts, and that was in church. And then my mum, some of the most precious memories, where I felt so safe, is when my mum would come into our bedroom at night, and my brother and I were in our beds, and my mum would come over and she'd do the Lord's Prayer with us and stroke our heads and say a certain prayer, and something about Jesus, shepherd, hear me, Bless my little lambs tonight, and in the darkness be thy near thee, keep thee safe till morning light. Something like that. And I just, there's this rhythm of that prayer in my head, and you just felt so loved and safe. So it was a fond memory of kind of something of faith, something mysterious. And I always prayed, from a young age, I always prayed. And I remember one of the things I used to do is I used to pray, and then I'd pray like this, and then I'd open my hands and I'd blow the prayer like this, as if I was blowing the prayer to God. And in a funny way, there's something quite theologically about our breath and that I always reflect on. But I used to do that. And so there was faith there. And then what's funny is looking back at my artwork, I did art for GCSE and A-level. And both of my major art projects were all about faith, religion. So I did like cuts and pastels of chapel spaces and religious figures for GCSE. And then in my A-level, I did a study of Salvador Dali and the influence that religion had on his art, and paintings like St. John of the Cross, which is the floating cross over the world, and things like that. And was really interested. And I even did a picture of myself crucified. And so it's really interesting to look back and see that there was something going on always, this sense of calling. And I always enjoyed chapel. I got annoyed when our headmaster would rush through the Lord's Prayer. He'd be like, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done." And he was just like, "Oh, just, let's say it, not just, speak it." So there was a connection that I always felt with God, I have to say. But it wasn't like we went to like youth groups and camps and things like that. And I went off, growing up, I was more, Charles and I were into women and drinking. And I remember going to Greenbelt, right? And not because it was a faith festival. I think I remember saying to my mum, "Oh, I think it's a Christian thing, Mum." My brother and I just went there to get girls and to get out with our mates and go camping. And because Greenbelt used to be in Northamptonshire near a place called Weldon, right really close to us. So we'd go, and 3 or 4 nights, camp and have fun and just mess around, and it was great. But so it wasn't like I didn't grow up in a kind of like church camps or anything like that.
Yeah, so I didn't go to church till I was 17, but I do have a memory of Greenbelt because I had a Saturday job in Curry's, Dixon's as it was, and one of the guys that was there was going to Greenbelt. And I said to him, "What is it?" He went, "Oh, it's a Christian thing." And I went, "What do you mean?" He goes, "No, it's like a Christian art and drugs festival." That's my memory of how he said it's awesome. He said there's drugs, there's drink, there's women.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So Greenbelt. Well, before I move on to your school a little bit, let me just, so how's your wife navigated this family? How has that worked? How has she found her place? Is it like she's quiet most of the time, but when she does say something, everyone like, "Oh my goodness, this must be really important"?
She is a deep, she's an internal processor and I'm an external processor, so she'll hold her tongue and wait. The thing that I think my wife does very well is, and my auntie actually pointed this out a few years ago, which was really encouraging to hear, because everyone does find my family intimidating. Like you are, you say something, you are putting yourself out there for, boom, everyone's going to say something. Or you might just be like, ignored, or I don't know, but it's like we're pretty intense. So if you come into that environment and you try and compete, you're gonna get eaten alive. Like there's no point in trying to compete. You best off just listening and adding where you can or whatever. Or what my wife did is she was very much able, because she's very confident, capable, intelligent woman. She's very able to just be okay in that environment. Just be okay. Just like, okay, hold a space, not get involved, not be stirred, not be offended, and if she has something to say, I'll nudge her. I'll be like, come on, you know, if we're talking something about feminism or something, or my dad makes a stupid comment about something like that, I'm like, get him, because she's able to. But ultimately, she knows the truth of that. My family do love well, in the sense we love each other, and the basis of anything is that is a principle. So she recognizes that first, and so she doesn't get easily offended. Everyone saw, like, one of the things that was really nice is it's my parents once said it's really lovely to see how you love each other. And that was really encouraging for me to hear. And my family know that I can be difficult and up and down or whatever. And actually, Jenny was really able to have patience with me when I needed it, and to offer grace and love when I needed it. And Jenny and I are really good for each other like that, because she can have quite a melancholic outlook sometimes. And my optimism and positivity feeds her and challenges her and pushes her. And her, in a sense, groundedness and gentleness draws me back when I'm maybe too loose or crazy. So we have a good working relationship. And my family saw that, and they saw that she brings the best out of me. So their care for me led to going, she's really good for Chris. And so they loved her quite quickly. So yeah.
Well, before we move on to school, do you have any particular memories of Dublin and Iowa?
Dublin, I have two memories. One is my brother and I would cycle our bikes, BMXs, kind of crazy around the streets. And I remember racing around the streets, doing kind of turns and stuff. And then I have loads of fond memories going back to British Bay. But that wasn't when we were living there. That was from England, and we'd go back for the summer. But loads of fond memories of British Bay and playing in the sand dunes with our friends, and just the freedom that felt like. It was kind of our parents really just let us run. Ireland in a way is a very different time and different way of living, like, which is really healthy in some ways. Like, there was no sense of, be close, don't get out of eyeshot. It was like, go have fun, go do what you want. We were let loose, really. And that was really refreshing for my brother and I, feeling the freedom of that. So I loved British Bay. Iowa, I was so young, 4 and 5. I remember we got into trouble for painting a guy's house. An older kid led us to paint. He said, "Oh, we need to paint this guy's house." And we were like, okay. So he just gave us brushes, and we just started painting this person's house. And there was this big uproar as everyone ran out. What are these children doing? And my parents were like, "Oh, so sorry." But that's it. And then we also had these tricycles. Like in Iowa, we had these like 3-wheelers where you'd sit back with a big front wheel, 2 small back wheels, and you'd cycle. I remember those, and those being really fun. And fireflies at night. There was a fire.
Like The Shining.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were big in America at the time, in the kind of 80s.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're the two kind of things that I remember, little bits and bobs.
So in your book, The OMG Effect, we'll talk about the book later, but I just want to raise now, you talk about your school years, and you said they were not the happiest, and elsewhere you mention in the book drifting in your teenage years, and you said that here. So what did that mean? What was that unhappiness, and what did drifting look like for you?
It was all the funny thing and reflection about this school is it longed to be the private school it longed to be a better private school than it was. There was this tension within the staff and the teachers, and you kind of got this only now I look back, and it wanted to be something it wasn't. It was a minor public school, and it was trying to be better than its station, I think. And we were in this time of transition, and I remember feeling like really bullied by teachers, not by students, right, by teachers. My brother and I were quite sporty, and my sports team got into a big rugby final, and And I was in a Latin class, and the teacher was like, I said to the teacher, I have to go because, you know, I've been given permission to go, leave school on this afternoon because we've got this big rugby competition that we were part of. And the Latin teacher just hated me and my brother, and was like, have you done your homework? And whether he'd said it or not, I don't remember. Anyway, I hadn't done whatever work he'd said. So he wrote a letter to try and get me to not go on this big rugby event. And then I went down to the headmaster's office and said, you know, he made me carry it, you know what I mean? Go and bring this to the headmaster in order to stop me from going. Like it just, as an adult, I just think it's crazy, you know, like why would you do that to a child? And, you know, going to the headmaster's office, like, oh, what's going to happen? And luckily the headmaster wasn't there. And I just left the note and left. And went, and my dad picked us up, and we went and played the tournament. And I can't even remember if we won or not. There were two memories that I have of junior school where I felt very pushed down and afraid of teachers, and it wasn't a warm school, you know, it wasn't warm and loving. It was an insecure school in itself, and that led to insecure staff and mean staff. And then, you know, growing up in the school, I had one bad year where I think there was a bit more verbal bullying, where I was in the class. It was a very difficult year for me, and I remember feeling quite alone and isolated. I remember the students of that class not being very kind. I remember one very difficult time where I was in the class, and this boy said, "No one likes you, you know, you just no one." And it was just such a cruel thing. And then just announced to this class, you know, does anyone like him? And me, just my heart just dying inside, like how this is possible. But one of my friends, who's still a good friend today, Charlie Caswell, he said, I like him. He's good. He's a nice guy, you know, and me just, you know, wanting to die and cry inside. And that was a difficult year. Just set no sense of identity, no sense of who I was. And, you know, and so that was difficult. And then senior school was a bit better. I mean, our year was quite a good year. We didn't really there was no physical bullying. It was a bit, you know, that was a bad year, but that grew out of it. We grew out of that stage. And then on the whole, my year group was quite a nice group. The year below were a bit more problematic. There were a few nasty characters in the year below us. But our year was relatively close, and still is. We still have WhatsApp groups that I'm part of with some of my, you know, the group of guys from my school. And so, yeah.
So put two questions together here. If you carried on playing rugby, what position did you play? And did you have any mentors through high school? Anyone that was a positive influence on you? So what position did you play?
So Charles and I were quite sporty, but we're quite small.
Right.
So from an early age, from very young, Dad took us down to rugby, which we thought initially was American football, because when we just got back from America, he took us to this thing called rugby. We had no idea. And we're like, when are we getting the pads? You know, really excited about getting these shoulder pads. And it was like, you don't have them in rugby. But we, you know, my brother and I scrapped. So we would tackle people and it'd be fine. And we were known as scrappers. So we could get by. So rugby, we started at a very early age, but hockey was my major sport. Like I became a very good hockey player from quite early on. And but rugby, I was a winger. My brother was scrum half. But funnily,
I don't peg you as a scrum half, but
well, the thing was, this is kind of ironic. This is a classic twin thing. Just one day he went in and the guy was like, "Oh, you can be scrum half." And that literally was it. And you know, for the rest of our rugby career, which was like 15 years, he was the scrum half and I was the winger. But what turns out to be a little bit funny is that I may have done better as a scrum half because I'm actually quite ambidextrous. So my brother is very strong right-handed, but I can use my left hand quite well. And I wonder sometimes growing up whether I was actually naturally left-handed, but because my twin used his right hand, that my mum, you know, always put the pencil in my right hand. And do you know what I mean? And it was like, oh, I had to copy him. So but playing rugby, I can pass quite well off both hands. I've got quite a good, I actually pass naturally off my left hand. So anyway, who knows, would I have been a better scrum half, but I was winger and I was quick. And so did that for a while and played rugby and loved it, and loved, even the cold days of being gathered together with your mates and knowing in a sense you're going out for a battle. I love that. And then, being hockey and cricket were my major sports, but hockey being the primary one. And that was good, playing hockey from an early age, right the way up, being asked to play first team when I was quite young still. Never getting a hockey blue, again, the school. There's two things like that are really difficult from my school time, which my brother and I were the head performers for two big school productions. So we were Dromio of Ephesus and Dromio of Syracuse in Comedy of Errors. So we were one of the lead twins in this production and did that school production. Got a thank you, but didn't get house colors. School colors, a guy who did one small part, who had a long speech because he was the right fit for the school. And he was like a well-behaved boy. He got school colors for that production. And then the next year or 2 years time, Charles and I again got quite big roles in Romeo and Juliet. I was Mercutio, so one of the major roles. Again, got passed over for school colors. Another couple of people got school colors. So it was very weird looking back at our school and thinking why, I was not rewarded for the things that I did. And then I did not get school colors for hockey, even though I played 3 or 4 years in the first team, was seen as one of the best hockey players in the school. I got player of the year for one of the years, and people who were less good, but more in a sense, the right style of student, as in academically sound, relatively well-behaved, they all got school colors and I didn't. So I always felt like this sense of being told I was a bit bad and not good and a little bit off the hinge was always fed in. I had quite a good history teacher, Mr. Brown, who was always, you never saw me as a troublesome kid. He just saw me as a kid. And he was probably one of my more encouraging teachers. But, there's a sense of just feeling a bit of, hurt from school in some ways. I don't describe it as a massively unhappy time. It wasn't like, I think I just put my head down and just carried on and just didn't let any, there was a level of that, but it wasn't like the golden days of school, which some people reflect on.
Yeah. So let's go on to your time at Kingston University, just down the road for me. And you talked about being a bit of a negative environment for you.
Yeah.
What happened at Kingston University?
So, leaving school, my brother and I, we both wanted to go our own ways. We hated being just identified by the other. We wanted to find ourselves, we wanted to have our own adventures. So we both determined not to go to the same university. And unfortunately, in a way, I was coming from a relatively sheltered background and, a private school kind of background. And I was entering into a university that was, Kingston, a suburb, London, was not in any way on the kind of one of the universities that public school people go to, and got there, and it was a quite hard environment. And I was suddenly I was suddenly by myself for the first time, having come from a relatively sheltered background, speaking with a relatively, posh English tilt. And at the beginning, it was just like, who am I? But I had a rugged, in a sense, my brother and I could fight. We've had fights growing up and a couple of ruckuses at school and things like that. So I wasn't really nervous, but I was unhappy and wanting to find some sort of sense of structure and security. And what I found was I got into a group of guys who in one way had great times together, a lot of laughter and fun. And in another way was really negative in the way that they related to one another was very much to take the mick out of each other, to hold each other down, and to call each other out on things. And again, I felt like I went through a time very voiceless, where I felt very oppressed. And we got into poker, playing a lot of poker, which I love playing poker, and I think it's it's fun if you do it in a proper setting, in a proper way, and you're not being stupid. But it was like a lot of poker, a lot of smoking weed. We wouldn't go out massively, but buy a bag of weed and then everyone would sit around smoking and playing poker for hours on end, and the environment was just not healthy and not holy, and it wasn't an environment of positivity and you can do it. It was like stripping each other down and taking the mick, and it was difficult. And I remember feeling quite alone and quite voiceless. Like, who am I? Like, what is life? And it wasn't all bad, and there were good times. And my friendship group, we stayed together, we clung together, and we did things together. And there was joy in that, and there was loyalty there. And in a way, it was a weird kind of gang-like mentality where you just stuck with each other. And there was something positive about that, but also something negative. And yeah. So what happened at university was, I got through it. I mean, I can't believe I got a degree through it, because my work level there was so bad, and just no interest. And the only thing that got me through it was the worry that I wouldn't get a degree, and I'd be this failure. So I had this weird, I just got to get it done. And in the end, got my degree, got a third in Kingston. I met a girl, fell in love at the end of that time in Kingston with a girl, my first love, a girl called Tara Watkins, still remember her. And that was a real positive for a lot, because that made me, that kind of, she was a Christian, and I met her on her 18th birthday. She was out, and we ended up going out for a while, and I was suddenly aware of me being loved and in love for the first time, where I was like, this is amazing. This must be more of what life is about. And she brought me to a church thing, and I remember looking around going, wow, like, and just feeling really weirdly proud of everyone that I saw there. I was like, well done, this is exactly what you should be doing. And and I felt really proud of everyone there, but always felt in a weird whisper that something was going to happen for me like that. And then we ended up splitting up, and it broke my heart, and I broke down in tears. I remember crying at home and being like, wow, what is this? And then I remember praying in that moment, like, and funny enough, I found myself thanking God. I was thanking him for the love that I had felt, and thanking him for all that it had been, because it was so powerful, that sense of suddenly, after many years of feeling quite lonely and isolated, and who am I? Suddenly someone was basically teaching me that I could be loved. And that was really powerful. And even though it was very painful, I was thankful for the time that I had. And that breaking of my heart amongst this searching was the tipping point for me to leave everything and go to Africa. So that was just after university.
So you get your business management degree by the skin of your teeth, and started work at a property company, but very quickly go to Tanzania. I was going to say, how did that happen? But this precipitated that, did it?
Yeah. So I had this job after university for a temping company, just, like join a temping company, get me a job, worked a few different things, and eventually got into this job for a company called Tyndale, worked in Wellingborough. My parents wanted me, in a sense, out of the house, and wanted me with some sort of anchoring. Again, I was in this period where everyone was like, what is Chris going to do? Charles was in Sandhurst. I got this job in business, and I was doing okay in it. I had the house, I had a mortgage, I had a car, and I was, going to work, and, I was 21. And, and this company was a small family company, but their turnover was like, 20 million a year or something, 21 million. And so they had a good turnover, and there was potential for me to be successful there. And, but I was like, do I want this? My heart was broken. I was still quite unhappy, quite isolated, quite, searching for my place in the world. And my faith was growing and stirring, and the whispers of God were there. And I was having, funny enough, like dreams and even visions and of stuff that I couldn't explain. And I knew something was coming, and I always felt close to God, and suddenly that thing was happening, this draw to God. And then, I was also looking at this job and this path line in front of me and thinking, this is not what I want. I don't want a career here. I don't even care if I ran this company and was earning six-figure salary I just don't want that. And so a friend of mine, my good friend, John Major, who's still a good friend of mine today, he went out to Africa and he said, Chris, you would love this, mate. You would love this. And so he said, you should do this. And that was basically, I remember I was thinking about it, and I wrote to the bishop and I said, I don't know what God's calling me to, but I think I'd love to come. And I thought that the bishop would be like, here's some things you need to do. Right, go earn some money, raise awareness, And all he said was, tell me when your flight's booked and I'll pick you up. And that was it. And I was like, wow, like an open invitation from this bishop to come. So I was like, I think I got to do this. And I talked to my boss at work, and my boss actually at work, she was really good. She was like, none of us see you here. Like, as in, not in a negative way. She was like, you're not, this isn't you. Like, there is something, we always wonder, why are you still here? There was this sense of, they saw something in me that they were like, why are you here? And that was really encouraging. And then I went away and I was staying at a mate's house, and I remember I just sat down at his computer and I just booked my flights, just did it, just booked them. And I went outside, real sense of freedom. And then I told my parents I'm going to Africa, and they'd kind of been like, oh yeah, okay, you sure you can go to Africa and And then when I told them I'd booked my flights, they were suddenly like, what? You have a house, you have a mortgage, you have a career path, you have structure, what are you doing? You're gonna throw this away, and I was like, I've got to go. And everyone knew that I was unhappy and searching. And my parents wondered if I'd come back. They thought I'd come back. If I did come back at all, my dad is always like, I thought you're going to come back with an African wife, and who knows. And so yeah, I just went. I quit my job, put my house on the market for rent, and I went to Tanzania. And it was amazing. It was the first choice I made for my life. That's how I see it. I see up to that point, my parents were making decisions for me. Even the house, I was no clue about any housing or anything. And my parents were taking me to houses to see, and they were like, this one, what about this one? And I was like, yeah. I was in a fog, and I was like, who am I and where am I? And I was just being led. And then suddenly I was like, I need to take a decision for me. And that was the first decision I made, because I call it like the conveyor belt of middle class, kind of, which is like, you're going to go to school and, private school, and then you're going to go to university, and then you're going to get a job, and you're going to get a house. And that's just your life. And I was just like, eject. I just had to get out. So I pulled the plug and left and went to Africa.
So what was it like when the plane landed and you stepped out? Do you remember that moment?
I remember the moment before that. I remember sitting in Heathrow. I remember sitting, looking at the planes going up and thinking, this is going to change my life. This is a big moment that everything's going to change. And I couldn't wait for it. I was like, I need everything to change. And I was hungry for adventure. I was hungry for God. I was hungry to let go of the identity that everyone had placed upon me. and I just needed to strip off everything and find out who I was. And leaving, you know, it was the adventure that I needed, and I couldn't wait to go. So I remember sitting in that, making that decision, and I wasn't afraid of going. I was afraid of coming back. I remember that. I remember everyone was like, "Oh, are you nervous?" And I was like, "Nope." I was nervous about the time when I was going to come back, what that was like. But yeah, so I left.
So when you arrived, did you feel a freedom? Did you feel that you could be you and not the conveyor belt you?
I mean, if I'm honest, I wasn't like analyzing everything and figuring it out. I was just like, I'm in Africa, you know, like just, I was very much trying to be present. And that's what I learned, to be present in the moment and to be sucking in adventure, just like taking it all in, like seeing this different culture. I remember the bishop picking me up, hadn't slept much, and he said, "Right, we're going into town." He was a crazy man. His name is John Hayden. He was brilliant in many ways. And you know, I remember like following him around my first time, just sitting on a pavement, so tired. And he was doing errands around Dar es Salaam, me just watching him. And then I remember his wallet out the side of his pocket, and his kids were watching him to try and pickpocket him. And I remember saying to him, "Look, these children are trying to pickpocket you." And he was like, "Which children?" I was like, "Oh," and then he was like, "Get away, boys." And then I remember, yeah, getting into the Land Rover and just like, wow, here we go. Loved it.
So when you in the OMG Effect, which we will get to, you talk about the continent of Africa as forming. Here's a quote. There you go.
There you go.
You talk about it forming the bedrock of my faith.
Yeah.
So how did your faith grow into that? Unpack that for us.
So up to that point, faith had been this thing that had been hovering, and you know, I tasted faith. It was something there, but it had no reality or ownership. It wasn't mine. It was borrowed, and it was something that I kind of, there's a whisper of God in me, but it wasn't acted out. It wasn't part of me, and it wasn't based on any decisions that I had made. It was just given as a thing. But then Africa came along, and suddenly I went from what I call famine to feast. I was like so dry and worldly, and you know, just hoping for something. And then suddenly I was feast, where I was just like, God was on everyone's tongue. There's adventure everywhere. Everyone was okay with speaking about God. I was being woken up on the mission compound by worship music in the morning from the students singing praise and gospel music. And I was just like, this is amazing. And we were going around what we call confirmation safaris, where we get in the Land Rover and we driving around for hours on what we call dancing roads, because you're bouncing along and it's like you're dancing. And just going to villages in the middle of nowhere under this canopy of the galaxy, and camping there, and then just like speaking, you know, the bishop was preaching, and hundreds of people were being baptized and confirmed, and we were providing medicine and healthcare and money for the pastors, and we'd pick up and we'd go to the next place, and it was just amazing for a young guy. I was like, you know, 20, 21. And I was just like, wow, like this is amazing, and loved it. And, you know, and just the rawness of life. I'd been so like numbed to the reality of everything it felt like in my world. Like, but here I was connected to the earth and everything around me, because if the rains didn't come, the crops wouldn't grow, the cattle would die, and people would die. And it was just like, you were so present with everything. And it was so real, and I was gagging for reality and truth, and you know, what is my place in all of this, and who am I, and who are you, and how do we discover this? And then I was just seeing real stuff happening, and I was part of it, and I was helping to save lives, like people coming, and I was helping them, and I was, bringing them food or healthcare, or literally taking them to hospital, or binding their wounds, and then during the day as well, I was teaching English through a Bible, because everyone had a Bible, and one side was English and the other side was Swahili. So you could read the English and Swahili together. And so it was a really easy way to teach English. And that made me consume and read just chunks and chunks of the Bible, which was great. And my faith just grew and grew and grew. And I was seeing crazy stuff, like stuff it's hard to describe in the UK, like demonic stuff where, people in our compound like speak with different voices and coming off the ground and convulsions, and people praying over them, and stuff happening that you just like, what is going on here? And really, what I was reading in things like the Book of Acts, I was seeing on the ground, and I was like, this is all true. And I suddenly just felt this deep love of God, and I was like, this is what I want to give my life to. Like, this is it. This is what I've been searching for. And that was it for me. I was in, and I loved it.
Great. So eventually, at the age of 24, I think you're in Tanzania, and you're ordained a deacon in the Diocese of Mount Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
That's quite a journey from leaving everything behind to go to Africa, and your faith deepens and you end up being ordained. How did that happen?
So I have to say, it's just before I went to Africa, in the 6 months leading up to Africa, I've been having this drawing towards God, this increasing understanding that God is real. And I started to fall more into that. And I thought, am I called to, ordination? I knew nothing about the church. I knew nothing about what it looked like to be ordained or to follow that route. And I thought about it. And I'd even asked the local vicar at my mum's church to come. And in fairness to him, he didn't really know me very well. I was this young upstart, and he wasn't really enthusiastic about it. It wasn't like, wow, this is great, and encouraging my faith. It was kind of like, oh, really? Are you sure? And the way that I understood it was very academic. It was very like academic, and you're in class. And I was like, I don't want to get back into that. I just left a very unhappy academic time. So I put that to bed. And when I was in Africa, and suddenly it was just like, this stuff and this feeling and this sense of God and just drawing it out of me, I suddenly felt it come back, like, maybe I am, this is what I want to give my life to. How do I give my life to this? Ordination. And I was like, oh, I don't want to leave this and go back to university, which was like just a difficult time. So I was talking to a really great Christian guy who was out there with me. And he helped in a way. He was my peer, but he had been a Christian for a long time. His dad was a pastor, and he was just chatting with me a lot about faith, and that was really encouraging. And he said one day, you could do this. You could train here. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, you could do the degree course for ordination here, couldn't you? And I was like, oh no, it's in Swahili. And he's like, no, I don't think it is. I think it's in English. And I was like, really? So that I went to bed like that night with this sense of, should I do this? And then I woke up in the morning, and I just said to the bishop in the morning, and I remember coming into the lounge, and he was sitting in this chair where he sometimes sat and just prayed. And I said, oh, Bishop, I think I'd like maybe to become ordained. Could I join the course? And he just was like, he just sat in his chair, and he closed his eyes, and you can start on Thursday. And that was it. that was my BAP, and he just was like, bang. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And, that was always the way of me, like, was always like, decision, I'm doing it. And I just started, and yeah, and I rang home and I was like, oh, hi, mum and dad. So I'm gonna train and become a priest. And they were like, what? You know, and in a weird way, my mum was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. And then she tells me this story either then or sometime close to it, where she said, oh, when you were born on Christmas Day, and I went down to the chapel, and you know, I had twins on Christmas Day, and I prayed, Lord, you know, you've given me twins on Christmas Day, and it seems as though you may have a purpose, at least for them. So I just offer you one for your service. And I was like, what? And you know, I was like, Mum, you dedicated, you know, me at birth, and
Wow.
and it seems as though that's what she did. Anyway, so she was like, it's not surprising. And anyway, yeah, so that was the start of my training.
Great. So how long after you're ordained do you come back to the UK?
So I stayed out there for a while and did my training, did 2 years of this degree, and it was very, you know, biblically oriented. It was an exam on every book of the Bible. It was, you know, memory verses from the Bibles and context and questions. So it was like really densely Bible, which is really great foundation. And then I did that, and I was ordained. And by by Bishop Simon Makundi and within the Diocese of Mount Kilimanjaro, and it was great. And then I thought, right, what's next? And I thought maybe it's long-term mission work. Maybe that's what I should do. And so I decided to think that maybe that this was it, that I'm going to stay out and live here, become a full-time missionary. But there had been cracks that I'd been seeing appearing in my faith, and the ideology of what faith in Africa was starting to crack at the seams. And I, you know, when I was seeing and hearing people act in ways in front of people and in different ways behind the scenes, and, you know, faith was as broad as the ocean, but as deep as a puddle. And I was just like, it isn't the way I thought it was. And I knew it felt like Christianity in Africa didn't need more missionaries. It needed more theological educators, and it needed more depth and rootedness. And I didn't necessarily think that, you know, I wasn't going to be a theological educator. I was more adventure and church planting or whatever. So we did that church planting and things like that. But I was kind of like, I wasn't set on staying forever, but I was open to it. I was like, whatever, Lord, you know, I will. But I was also becoming a bit disillusioned by some things I'd seen. Pastors making mistakes and moral failures and things. And so I did a curacy, curacy. I was one of the vicars attached to the cathedral that we built, and I was just helping out in services, but I was also kind of running this mission. And then I returned to the UK, and I actually got invited to preach I've got the service thing here. Kept it. So the first time I ever preached in the UK, it's not that one, is it? It was my old school chaplain, and he where is it? I thought it was here. He asked if I would like to speak in his church, and I said, yeah, you know, why not? I'd love to. And I went along and spoke at these two churches in the UK, in Stamford, where I grew up. And it was kind of, here it is, St. Mary and St. Martin, Stamford, 27th of January, 2008, the fourth Sunday of Epiphany, preacher Reverend Christopher Lee. And I preached here, and in the services in the first time I ever preached in a church in England, and I was just like, wow. And on that day, it happened that this vicar had invited a number of clergy to have a lunch with him, and so I was preaching. I didn't know at the time, but I was preaching in front of quite a number of clergy, and one of those clergy was a guy called I can't remember his name, but it was Stephen something, like Stephen Harris or Morris or something like I can't really remember. But he was the head recruiter for the Church of England ordination. So he was the guy who basically was getting people to get ordained in the UK, in the Church of England. And he was there. And he just was like really interested in what my story was and how I'd come to where I am. And I talked to him, and he was like, if you ever want, you know, something along the lines of, if you ever want a full career in the UK, I would encourage you to come back and do some more training in a theological college in the UK. Or in a sense, people will kind of patronize you. He didn't say that, but it was that feeling. They'll be like, you weren't really, you went to Africa and got ordained, you know, there was that sense. And so I was aware, like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And so that put it on my radar. I then met a couple of bishops who said a similar thing, like, think about going to theological college in the UK. I then went away with a mission organization called Crosslinks. And Crosslinks is kind of, they just fund missionaries to go out. And I was like, went with them to be like, well, what do I do? I went away on a kind of retreat stroke interview with them, where they questioned what I was doing and what I was going to do, and they were going to fund me, or would they fund me to become a missionary? And the ironic thing was, everyone was applying for funding to go do something that they, you know, were going to do, and I was applying for funding for something I've been doing for 2 years. This is, you know, third year. Would they support it? And they said no. They said no. And they, you know, they obviously didn't think I was up to scratch or whatever. But one of the things they did say was, we think that you should return to the UK and do more training in England. And that for me was like, okay, you were kind of confirming what other people had said and what I was thinking. And in a sense, it was a relief to me, because I felt like I can't just give up. I can't just leave what I'd been doing. You know, I was building a hospital out there. I was helping to build a hospital. I was, you know, in charge of the mission. I was doing great work. People were relying on me. There's a lot on my shoulders out there. And I felt like I was just leaving everyone. So these people were like confirming, no, we think you should return. You should return. It felt like the decision was being taken out, you know, out of my hands a little bit. And I was free to say, okay, this seems right. So I went back to Africa, and I basically tied up loads of loose ends, and I was out there for another 9 months or something. And then I just before I left, I'd interviewed at Wycliffe and Ridley, and I got offered both, but in the end chose Ridley, and knew I was coming back from, you know, bushland Africa, already ordained, and was going to go to Ridley. I remember my interview for Ridley was so funny, because my parents, bless them, they had no clue, and I had no clue, and they were like, you have to go in a full suit, you know. So I went in a really like prim suit that my parents had bought me, in my collar, to Ridley Hall, and I was just like, you know, and because the image I got of the church was this, you know, you present this image, and but everyone was in jeans and t-shirts and stuff, and I felt really like, what is going on? And anyway, I got offered the place, and I took it, and finished my time in Africa and came back to Ridley Hall.
So you go back to Ridley. What was student life like this time? I assume a bit different.
Yeah, funny enough, straight away there was 2 quite shocking things that happened. that I was like, oh, what? So Ridley Hall, firstly, let me just caveat this by saying I absolutely loved it. And I loved residential training, and I really enjoyed my time at Ridley. It was very healing, very powerful time for me. But the first few days, I remember thinking, what's going on? So we get to Ridley and we're moving in, and there's a big party going on, and everyone, you have to dress in costumes from your staircase. Everyone is assigned to staircases, and I was on E staircase, so something to do with E, and I think I went as like Edward Scissorhands or something. And one of my, he was to become a friend, but another guy, he was on G staircase, and he turned up as a gimp. I was like, what is this? And it was like training for the priesthood, and this guy was blacked in leather. He had a bin bag over his face and stuff. And I was just like looking around, like, I've just come back from bushland mission Africa to England. What is this? You know, but anyway, I kind of saw the funny side of it. And you know, I was just, it actually was, in a way, it was like a bit of a moment where I was just like, you don't have to think that you have to be something you're not, just be here. So it was quite freeing in a way. But then, but Ridley Hall was really safe, really. It was amazing for me because I finished Africa and I got back to Ridley, and suddenly I realized all I had to worry about was myself. I just have to turn up to stuff. I just have to go to a lecture and write an essay. And this relief, you know, from holding this mission and this at such a young age, this mission compound and the teaching and the healthcare and this, you know, stuff that was going on there, and people dying, and loads of crazy adventures over there and stories, and blow your mind with some of the stuff. But to suddenly just coming back to the UK and all I had to worry about was me, I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I go into chapel and praying, and one of the guys there is still a really good friend of mine. His name is Jerry Field, and he came up to me really early, and he was like, I feel the Lord has said that we should pray together. And he said, before I came, I was praying about who I should pray with, and he gave me the name Chris, and I just feel like we should do that. And it was amazing, and it was definitely the Lord. And, you know, so many great prayer times, so much healing and words, and just a real time of growth and security and healing and wholeness for me happened there. And I loved it. I loved it. And I thrived there. And I got a 2-1 from Cambridge, you know, and I was matriculated into Queen's College, Cambridge. I was the assistant chaplain there, in the chapel. And, you know, I joined the hockey and sport, thrived. And it was really healing because, you know, like for my whole life, you know, I was doing these big sporting achievements and getting no recognition, and doing these things for school and getting no recognition. And I just felt like that was this weird thing over me. And then, you know, I ended up, a Christian randomly, who didn't know I was a Christian at the time, said, oh, you know, you should, I saw you playing hockey. You know, I played in a little match. You should go for university. You're like really good. And then I was like, oh, I had it wasn't on my radar. I was training to be a priest, you know, and sport was a thing I did at school. So it wasn't there. But then suddenly I was like, okay. And then, you know, I joined the university teams, and I was, you know, immediately put in the third team. I played about three games for them, and then they put me in the second team, and I played 1 game for the second team. And then the coach from the first team heard that I was quite good and said, and he was South African. I remember him saying, Chris, are you ready to play serious hockey now? And I was like, oh yeah, okay. So I was put in the first, and I absolutely loved it. You know, I got a blue in the end for Cambridge, playing hockey, and that was you know, this was this accolade, you know, this celebration of something I'd done, and people were recognizing it and said, here you go, you deserve this. And for me, and a Cambridge blue, you know, it was so much bigger than any of the other things that, you know, school was going to offer me, colors or whatever. And so to get that was great, and it was very, very, very healing, and I loved it. And then of course I met my wife as well, you know. I remember being in lectures, and church history lectures and looking down to my left and seeing this girl who I thought, oh, she's pretty, and then kept looking at her, and kind of creepy guy, I suppose. I was just like, want to talk to her, and immediately was like, wow, this girl is amazing. And she wasn't interested. Jenny she doesn't remember meeting me. She doesn't. I mean, I used to hold the door open for her. She doesn't remember. I used to sit on the end of the lecture hall because she was always late. She's still always late for everything. She just, I don't know what it is. She blames dyslexia, but she's just always late. And so she was late to our wedding, but she was always late. And I would sit on the end of the lecture hall with the notes, and I'd always let people go through me. Oh no, you go in, so I could sit at the end, because I knew she's going to come in last. And she'd then sit next to me. So I met Jenny and fell in love, and
how did you eventually capture her attention enough for her to remember who you were?
I don't know. I mean, persistence, maybe. We got chatting and said, we're all early days at Cambridge, and I was just like, do you want to go for a drink? And that time you just ask someone, they're like, oh, okay, yeah. So a few of us are going to the pub. Do you want to come? And she did, and got talking about what I did and who I was. And she was like, oh, you're training to be a priest. And she was a strong Christian, raised in a very Christian family. So I think it was kind of made her pay a little bit more attention. She was a bit like, oh, interesting. She thought I was going to be quite cocky and arrogant because, I was a sports guy, a hockey guy, and first team. And you can have a bravado around campus when you're like that. So, but then she knew, she kind of tested me, she told me, and saw if I was able to be silly, and I'm very silly. So she kind of loved that, and the silliness that we had together. And she one day we were I was walking through her college, and she texted me at the same time as I text her, and our text crossed. And that was a moment that I was like, this is interesting. And the really interesting thing happened when we were in the pub, and she goes to me, I think my sister knows you. And I was like, what? And immediately as she said that, these alarm bells in my head went off, and in a good way, and not in a freak, oh no, what have I done? But basically what was really amazing was 2 years ago, on my first time back from Africa. So I would go to Africa, work for 6, 9, 10 months, come back for a couple of months, recoup, get some income, work, whatever, and then go back. And on one of these times that I came back, I was out with my mates in London, and staying at a friend's house. And I got up in the morning, and I said, I've got to go to church. So I got up and I walked around this area of London I knew nothing about. And I came across this tiny little community, free church denomination. And I just was like, oh, I'll just go in here for a service. And I walk in, and randomly I remember this girl, and quite pretty girl. And I remember she was a little odd and quirky, but after the service we got chatting, and I remember funny enough, in that service, the vicar or the leader said, oh, we've got a guest in today, and who's come over from Africa, and got me to come and talk. Because I said on the way in, he said, oh, you're new. And you go, oh, I've actually just come back from Africa. I'm just staying at a friend's house. I was working out there in the church. And he got me to talk at this church. So she saw me after the service, we chatted, and it turns out she did exactly the same thing. She'd been on a night out with her friends. She got up in the morning, decided to go to church, and we met and chatted. And I remember her having whiskers on her face because she'd been to a fancy dress party and she hadn't rubbed them off. Anyway, so we got chatting, and she heard a little bit about my story from what I said at the front of church, and we said bye. And 2 years later, we're in the pub in Cambridge, or 3 years later, whatever, and that was Jenny's sister. And Jenny had gone home and said, I'd met this guy, and her sister had said, hold on, is he? And Jenny was like, what? And it felt like this was a confirmation. This was some sort of written in the stars, whatever you want to say, something that was leading us to say, I'm in this.
Yeah. So let me ask you, at this point, do your parents see you differently? Do they observe? Do they have conversations with you about how you've changed?
I think initially, and I think many Christians do this, when I first became, in a sense, gave my life to Christ, and however you see the idea of being born again, my understanding is it's not just it's birth is 9 months and all of that. And so it was a transitional time. But anyway, when I first became a confessing Christian, I put my walls up around everything, because I was afraid of what I'd come from. I was afraid of my past. I was afraid of where I'd been, and I was afraid of going back there. So I was quite strict with people and with my family, and they were like, we're just going to have to deal with this for a while, like what Chris has become. Because my conversation changed, the way that I changed. And my family is very vocal and loud and sweary. And I remember how I said to my dad, which kind of he made him double look. My dad was swearing, and I was like, Dad, can you just not swear, please? And can you talk to me like a normal person, like in a way, kind of a reasonable thing, but nothing that I'd never done before. And even my friends, they were like, when I talked to them, they were like, you were a bit weird for a while, but only because I was trying to keep my heart protected. I asked one of my good friends to leave. I said, you need to leave my house, because he was just saying really horrible, negative things. And I was like, I don't want to be around this, and I basically kicked him out of my house. And he's like, I can't believe you did that. So I went through this time where I was like, I have found this amazing, precious thing. I don't want it taken from me. And I realized that I have lived in this way. And I was afraid that I would be thrown back into this place before. So at the beginning, there was this time where walls were up around me. And I would have said I was quite conservative, in my thinking, in my acting. And then over time, the walls went down and roots went down. And I became a lot more confident in my faith, a lot more confident in who I was in my faith, and a lot more secure in it. And that led me to be a lot more, in a sense, rounded edges, more full of grace, and less able. So my parents saw this shift, saw this transition happening. And at the beginning, they were a little bit like, and they were a bit worried that I was becoming really, I don't know, channel vision, and I was becoming weird. And I remember once Dad had picked me up from the airport, and we were driving back, and this person was driving quite slowly. And Dad was like, get out of the way, kind of thing. And I was like, oh, they're a Christian, that family. And Dad thought that I was commenting on them like being a secure, safe driver, and saying, well, they're obviously a Christian, and he was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, no, it's because there's a fish symbol in the back of their car. That's a Christian symbol. And for me, that was a moment in which I was like, oh, they're worried that I'm become this completely different person, and that I'm just going to stand in judgment and criticize them now, and they've lost me. Like I suddenly was aware like that was a thing. So anyway, there was that worry for a while from them, but they also saw that I needed a change, and they suddenly saw me growing. And then at Ridley Hall in Cambridge, they saw me thrive. And from someone who was never seen as an academic, or I was never, top of the class, I was getting 2-1s in Cambridge course. So, and sending my essays. So I sent my essays home to my dad, because I was like, oh, Dad, can you grammar check it? But part of it really was that I wanted to read the theology I was writing. So it was a great way for him to be exposed to Christian teaching by getting him to read my essays. So that was a sneaky evangelistic point that I did.
I've not heard of that one. I like that one. Yeah. So after studying at Cambridge, you go and serve your curacy at Holy Trinity Brompton, HTB, and you're involved in their homeless shelter.
Yeah.
Now, you don't immediately, most people wouldn't immediately associate Brompton, being the home of Harrods, with homelessness. So Tell us about that, your curacy and ministry.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit to say on the curacy front. So Peterborough was my sponsoring diocese, and Peterborough wanted me to come and join them because that was my home church, was where my mum went, was in Geddington, was in Peterborough diocese. And they offered me a curacy. They said, we'd love you to come back, and they were paying for me. And I just felt like, no, that isn't where I'm going to go. I felt called to London. Jenny and I were engaged. She wanted to go to London, where the theatre was. She is a writer, director. And I felt called to, in a sense, sent from Africa almost as a missionary back to the UK. And I felt like London would be a place for me. And I wanted, sounds kind of strange, I wanted a kind of open evangelical place, but with a Catholic spirituality, but with also a charismatic element. And I said this, and I was just told, you're never going to find that. This just doesn't exist. And I was like, well, that's what I feel called to. I feel called to that. And so I said no to the places they offered me, and they released me as a diocese. And then I was in this no man's land where it was like, where am I going to get a job? And they say London doesn't take anyone. Because they just have their own, and they take their own back, and they don't invite anyone else in. So there was this nervousness in a sense, but I just said, I can't take a place through fear. I've got to take a place through hope and what I feel called to. And then eventually, randomly, I got an email from Miles Toolman, who was the associate vicar at HTB, and said, can I send him a CV? So I sent him a CV basically full of pictures of me in Africa. And full of like my time there, and I think he said to me, it always stood out because everyone was like writing their academics and where they come from, and you'd been a missionary, and then you're sending these things. So he invited me for an interview, and he said he was talking to me, and he has no idea what I was saying, but he remembers the Spirit resting on him and him going, wow, this guy needs to come here. And so he invited me. So I got to HTB, and what was amazing is, what was HTB? HTB is this, open evangelical, charismatic church, but they had this site called Queensgate, and St. Augustine's Queensgate, which is a high Anglo-Catholic service, and it was also where they did outreach and homeless shelter stuff. So I basically joined exactly where I felt I was being called to. So I did the high Catholic kind of services in the morning. In the evening, I went across and did the, charismatic worship in the evening services at Brompton Road. And I said to Miles, because there's a bit of an army of clergy over there. Like, some people were there for like 20 years, and some people are coming in and going out. And, in a sense, there isn't like this direct, you do this, you do this. So I kind of was like, well, what do I want to do? And so I carved out my own thing. I said, I'd like to do this. I'd like to work with the homeless on Wednesdays and do that ministry. And they said, yeah. So that's what I did. And it was amazing. It was the most, the best time of growth that I had at HDB. It was the ministry that I got most out of. And it was just, a beautiful thing to be part of, and to be the priest to the homeless. And I was seen as that, and I got, I had a lot of good relationships with a lot of people there, and the ministry at the time was, I think, it was thriving, and people who volunteered there since said, oh, we always missed what you brought, which was very nice. So I learned a lot from that time.
And then you become the priest in charge at St. Saviour's in 2015.
Yeah.
How did you end up there?
So I was having itchy feet. I wanted to leave HDB. I wanted to start my own thing. And the Bishop of Kensington at the time, Paul Williams, asked if I could help out with a church in Hounslow. And Nikki said yes, and put me forward, I think. And I ended up running a church called Holy Trinity in Hounslow for 8 months. And then at the end of that, there was an opportunity for me to maybe become the vicar there at Hounslow. And instead of just inviting me straight off to become the vicar, they said that they want to put it up for circulation and I could apply, which was in some ways, I knew what they were saying. They wanted to have a secure system of how they got the vicar in place. But it was also, in one way, you could read it as a bit of a kick in the teeth to them saying, oh, we don't really, we want to see if there's any better options. And I'd been there for 10 months and I'd really helped build it up. So, and Nicky was great in that he said, if they're not sure, we're sure, come back to us. And so I went back to HTB and served out the rest of my curacy. And then I was offered again this place. And then we felt it was right. And we felt, funny enough, it's not that God said go, it's that God said come. And that was the difference. It wasn't like I should go to this place. It was like, come home to me. And we remember coming and visiting the church and then going back to HTB and feeling in a weird way like we'd left home and we'd only just visited it. So it was as if this place had become this place where we were coming to. So I said yes and came here and was priest in charge. And then the church started to grow. People started to come. People started to stay. Children and families started to come. And soon a congregation of 12 became, 25, 30. And we were just, every year we were growing by a few people, a few families. And it was the proof was in the pudding. And the church was like, well, it's growing. There's people coming, they're staying. We suddenly went from 1 or 2 children to like 8 children to 10 children to 25 children. And now 6 years I've been here and, we're 70, 80 people, 2 services, doing well. I mean, lockdown has hit, but that's a different story for now, probably.
So, say you described yourself as an open evangelical charismatic with a Catholic sacramental understanding.
Yeah, classic.
I know well what that means, but for people not listening, what does that look like for you day to day where you are?
Gosh, well, I mean, my spirituality, I think one of the, things lacking in a lot of the church at the moment is a spirituality. It's like, how do you live? How do you act? How do you see your relationship with God, and developing a sort of spirituality? So it's something I'm quite passionate about. And that made me form the Young Franciscans. But so I mean, day to day, just that understanding is, I suppose I believe and trust in the Bible, not in a inerrant way, but in a way of, I respect the Bible and I know it has wisdom and teaching, and I believe that God has breathed his life into it, and it is a sacred thing. So I believe in the Bible, but I also love to worship God. I love the extempore way that one can pray and bring your emotions and the truth, the reality of your presence and your feelings to God in a real way. Like, you can just honestly worship him, and whether that's through pain or whatever, and you can worship him in that style. And I think there's something really freeing about doing that. But I also recognize, in a sense, more the Catholic understanding of the intimacy that one can have in silence and stillness, the depth of faith that you can have as you sit with God and, in a sense, allow yourself to be under his gaze. And that comes from more of my sacramental understanding. And I think that's more overtly expressed in the Catholic understanding. The idea of I think a lot of our Protestant world has lost an incarnational understanding, that we separate too quickly, body and spirit, while Christ was both and makes the physical divine. And so I have a keen understanding of seeing the sacred in everything. And that is also fed through my Franciscan understanding of my outlook of the world. So the things I'm passionate about are bringing young people to faith, bringing like evangelical Christians to a sacramental understanding of the world, and blowing the doors of their mind open by seeing the history and church history of people in the past, desert fathers, and driving deeper than their simply emotional state, faith in God, that God cares for them deeply in a more than just how you feel. So that's something I'm passionate about. So it's like prayer, basically types of prayer. So yeah, no, that answers it.
Great. Well, you founded the Young Franciscans in 2018. As I understand it, it's based in St. Saviour's under the Diocese of London. Could you tell us why you started that, what it is, what it does?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Young Franciscans came out of really desire, in a way, a selfish desire, where I suddenly became vicar of a church, and I was like, I am not in the place that I should be. And I knew that in order to, in a way, I'm the top of the food chain when it comes to spirituality in our parish, right? I'm the priest, I'm the local vicar. So I'm the guy who's like meant to know God in a way and meant to be that person for you. And I was just like, I have got huge amounts to learn, and I'm in no way in the place that I want to be spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, whatever, to lead all of this. So I wanted to have some sort of structure, some sort of rhythm of prayer, some sort of discipline, what I would call like a scaffolding around myself that allowed me to live out my Christian life. And I wanted to be outside of my church in a way. So I went on a journey of like, how can I find that? And I've always loved the Desert Fathers. I love monasticism. Saint Anthony the Great, kind of one of the first desert hermits, and the father of monasticism, a bit of a hero of mine. And that's always been there for me. So I thought about looking into the monastic kind of orders and things, but I was already married, but then a friend of mine on a retreat, I asked him to lead a church retreat, a guy who comes from a very high church background. I asked him to teach our church on some of the heroes of faith. So he taught on St. Augustine and his rule. He talked on not Augustine, Benedict and the rule of Benedict, and he talked about Ignatius Loyola and the founding of the Jesuits, and he talked about Francis of Assisi. And I came away from that going, wow, at the end of the retreat, he said, which voice came strongly to you? Which one spoke to you? And for me, it was St. Francis. And, his three major principles are love, joy, and humility. And they just I love that. That just feels so me. It just feels like how I think and see and feel. Love, joy, and humility. And so anyway, I investigated the Third Order and went along to a Third Order meeting, and basically was like, this is kind of great, but also the average age is 70. And, there's 5 women, they're all 70 or above, and me. And I was like, right, no one's going to want to join this. And I don't know if I want to just come along to like this. So I still wanted to pursue this. But how do I do that? So I eventually met a guy called Paul Alexander. Long story short, met him in a meeting, and I asked my local Franciscan kind of person who was oversight of me, can he be my spiritual director, my companion or whatever? And anyway, they said yes. I met Paul, and immediately Paul was like, what do you want? What do you want to do? And I was like, I'd love to establish something for young people. And he's like, we've longed for that. Why don't you do it? And I said, I got some ideas. He's like, just do it. So I just did it. And I came back home and I asked 9 people. All of them said yes. Do you want to come with me on a journey to think about living by a rule of life and thinking what that might look like? They all said yes. And I started the Young Franciscans. And so we made rules of life, and based on 9 principles of the Franciscan orders. And then we added a 10th principle, which is mission, direct mission, and developed this rule of life. And we met together, and we prayed together, and we moved into a more of that kind of sacred contemplative spirituality, more like a kind of almost like a Thésée thing. And we did that. And then eventually I always had a vision for a residential community. And St. Anselm had just started up, and I wanted to do something kind of like that here. So I set up a residential branch, and we had 3 people join. They lived for a year next door, and they developed a house rule. And so for 2 years we had dispersed group, and then for the 3rd and 4th year we had 2 years of residential with a dispersed. And we pray every day, and there was a rhythm of prayer and a rule of life. And then last year COVID hit us, and I was like, it's too much to do a residential as well as being a vicar, as well as having a kind of online ministry, as well as being a father. So I shut down the residential branch, and we've concentrated more on the dispersed network. And it's great. And there's a lot of, we've got, I don't know, 15, 16 young people from different areas of the world that developed a rule of life. We meet every Monday for compline. We meet once a month for teaching, all online. And the idea is once a year we'll go on a big retreat together, and we live out a spirituality, a framework, a scaffolding around our lives to say, this is how I think, or this is how I'm going to think or progress in life. And it's been really great.
Let's move on to Instagram.
Okay.
Rev Chris 7.
Yep.
What's the 7 for?
7 is, numerically biblical numbers are important, and certain numbers have meanings like 1, 3, 7, 12, 40. And I've always just liked the number 7. It always felt quite homely, but also quite divine, quite something about wholeness. And I couldn't have Rev Chris, so I was like, hey, 7 for heaven, let's stick that in. And so Rev Chris 7, that was it. It was stuck.
So you can scroll through Instagram to the early days. You can see you with your brother. Gosh, he is an identical twin. And then 30 likes here and there, and then here we are today with I think over 170,000 followers and thousands of likes on your Instagram. So did this just grow accidentally, or did you have some training and moment of trying to deliberately develop this? What happened?
So when I first came to St. Saviour's, we asked my brother and sister-in-law, so Jenny's sister, the one I met that was years ago, we asked them to come live with us because we had this big house, moving into this strange place, and they're a great Christian couple, and we were spending more and more time with them. So they said, yeah, we're going to come. So they came, and they moved in, and he is a YouTuber, and he just started a YouTube channel and was doing well with it. It was growing, and he asked me to come on to the channel. So he was like, hey, Chris, why don't you come on to my channel and try some chicken wings? And I was like, great, I'll get free food and I'll be on his YouTube. So did that. And then he actually said, I said, should I be in my collar or should I not? And he was like, oh yeah, keep your collar on. It'd be kind of a fun, quirky thing. Keep your collar on. And so I was like, great. So did the chat, ate some chicken, had a beer, and then got asked again, did it again, and got asked again, did it again. Suddenly people were like talking about me online. People were saying, oh, Rev Chris, he seems pretty fun. And then I started, the videos that I were in started to get quite a lot of views and more momentum, and the guys were doing like huge things, were being really successful. And I became a really popular guest. People were like loving the stuff that I was doing and saying, and how I came across online, and this young, articulate guy who's not judgmental, who is seemingly quite nice, and people have said that I have a whatever, I can't say it, but they said I have a fatherly spirit, like a sense of, people felt warm when I was talking to them and they felt cared for. And in one of the videos, I prayed for students, and that video went viral, and then loads of people started hunting me down, like, where is this guy? Like, and my Instagram started to fill up, and suddenly I was having, people watching me on YouTube and moving into my Instagram. And then the guys decided to start a new channel called Jolly. On that channel, they decided to have a specific series with me. And the series that they did with me was what called British Priest Reacts. And what that looked like was they would show me a music video or something contemporary, and they'd ask me to react to it. And it was like British Priest reacts to, Ariana Grande's God is a Woman. And so people were like, oh, that's interesting. What does a priest think about that? And I would talk on these videos and give a kind of non-judgmental, quite fun, open discussion. And people were, I don't know, I mean, they were amazed by the fact that I wasn't old, detached, judgmental, angry. And he was this young, fun, guy. And yeah, those videos went millions of hits. I mean, we did one with Ariana Grande, and within the first 2-3 weeks, it was like 4 million views. And I was like, this is crazy. And I remember having to put my hand on the wall and just be like millions of people are watching this, and I'm in a sense speaking the gospel. And then our videos, these videos that I was in, were going massive. Like, I did a Billie Eilish one, I think it's on 19 million views. And I suddenly realized that I had this opportunity to communicate both on the YouTube and more directly and more focused on my own Instagram, which was my publication. So I decided to just do these little thoughts and give like little ideas and scriptures and things like that. And then one day I was like, oh, maybe what should I do? I mean, I want to communicate, the gospel. I want to teach people about love and Christ and the world, and and help them, and I've only got 60 seconds, and and maybe how am I going to do a talk or a sermon in 60 seconds? And I was like, oh, sermon, 60 seconds. Oh, maybe I'll just call it 60-second sermon. And literally just did it. And then no strategy, no like real thing. It was just like, just get on and talk. So I developed this thing called 60-second sermons, and it just hit a note with a lot of people. And suddenly loads of people were following me. The 60-second sermons became their own thing. People were sharing it with their friends, sharing it in their groups, sharing it in their churches. Oh, have you seen this guy? And then I got national press, and I got interviewed. I've been on loads of magazines and TV, and now I get asked to do like conferences. I've got a conference that I'm speaking at tonight after this, and it just took on its own momentum, and it became this crazy thing that I was doing, and I've just seen amazing life and light and people affected, and people direct messaging me every day saying how much of an impact I've made on them. And this new medium of media became this part of my ministry. Early on it was just a thing I did, and now it's it's a huge part of what I see my calling is. But in no way did I ever think that, trying a piece of chicken and drinking a beer would lead me to become, this online internet vicar. So that's where we found ourselves.
So what did your PCC and church make of this?
So yeah, I mean, my PCC now are an amazing bunch of people who are just like, what do you want, Chris? How do we get there? Let's do it, kind of thing. But I don't talk too much about my online presence in the church. I protect it a little bit. I don't promote my church, St. Saviour's, online. Funny enough, we don't even have a church Instagram account. and I'm seen as the internet vicar, the Instagram social media guy, and I just don't do that. I promote church, and I tell people to find their local church and encourage them to get to a church, but I don't promote our church for two major reasons. One is we would swell probably quite a bit, and whether it would be healthy for us, I don't know. I don't think so. It wouldn't be an organic growth. And the second reason is, and I need to protect people in my church from in a sense, fans. The second reason is if I was to start to make my Instagram about my church and my locality, I would alienate a lot of people from all over the world who watch my Instagram and who would never be able to come to my church. So it would distance them from me. And actually they feel like I am their pastor. You know, a lot of people will watch my stuff and feel like I'm helping them on their journey. And if I was to be like, oh, my service is at this and they can't come, they'd feel this distance. And so there's a thought about why I do it that way as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So your latest Instagram post was a piece of heavyweight theology, wasn't it?
Which one? The one in the back in the toilet.
In the bathroom and the wallpaper.
Yeah, I did a reel. I've not done loads of reels before, but yeah, I just you know, that's what I think I try and communicate is a bit of authenticity. You know, like a lot of church accounts and you know, Instagram is cut and paste. It's like church sermons online, and you know, there's a difference between online church and church online, and so you got to reimagine the space and use it in the way it is. And you know, a lot of young people today, they're living online in a way that we don't necessarily understand, and they're hungry for authenticity and realness, especially when it comes to something like faith and communicating truth. You just see through all the stuff of life. So my Instagram is stuff of me preaching. It's stuff of me being a dad. It's silly stuff like me talking about what I do in lockdown. You know, put crazy wallpaper on my toilet.
It's crazy wallpaper, I will say. It's pretty hallucinogenic.
Yeah, it's great. You're sitting there and you're like, wow. We've always done fun things in that toilet. We once had a kind of a light bulb that was more like a disco ball. If you turn it on, it was like it just became full of colors.
Yeah.
But yeah.
3,500 likes already.
Yeah.
And can see from your Instagram, can see you're a vicar, can see your family.
Yeah.
And then these fun things and then thoughtful things in between on some of the most profound issues of life that you speak into. Wonderful. And you've been asked by the Church of England, haven't you, I believe, about ways of them using social media.
Yeah, I mean, I've been invited to speak at conferences, and I've done things with the digital team, and you know, and but to be honest, my wife is better at Instagram than I am. She is like much more, she understands it a lot better than I do. I can't, it's funny, you know, people say, you know, they might think I'm this amazing, like knowledgeable Instagram guy, but I'm not. I don't do many hashtags, and apparently you're meant to. And I know that there are certain good times to post for me because my following is all over the world. So my largest following is America, about 21% of following from America, and then the next is South Korea, and then the next is the UK, and then Australia, and the Philippines, and Singapore. They're my major following, and then I've got percentage following from almost every country around the world. And so I know that a good time for me to post is probably middle of the day, because it's at least middle of the day for a lot of people. A lot of people are getting up and a lot of people are just going to bed, so I'll catch them. But I don't have a massive strategy. I just post what I think when I feel. I'll post something. Like my wife yesterday told me, apparently it's not good to post on a Monday, because Monday is a low time for engagement. And I was like, oh, right. I've never known that. And so yeah, I don't feel massively equipped to give strategy to people.
So you're not sitting down in a room every day with your digital strategy team planning your content for the next month and release dates and times? No,
not in the slightest. I have no idea what I'm going to post from one moment to the next. None. I just have a thought about something and I'll be like, oh, that's good. Or I'll hear something and it'll click a thought and I'll be like, oh, that's a good thing. And I'll post it like that. But maybe I should. I don't know. I'm not one for the whole drain the spirit by over management that I sadly think sometimes the church moves into. I'm more into a sense of anointed leadership that I see and that looks to be inspiring. That's what I think inspires and grips people. And that is where the church, I think, is inspiring, when you get those moments and those things. And that excites me about the church. But,
So let me ask you about managing your online profile and life in two ways. One is, what's it like for your wife? So let's cut to the chase on this one. So my wife said, who are you interviewing today? And I went, oh, it's, the Instagram vicar. And she went, oh, he's easy on the eyes.
very kind of her.
Very kind of her. And of course, you've got that reputation as the hot priest Instagram vicar. How do you and your wife navigate that? You mentioned direct messages. You must get stuff from people all around the world. How do you navigate that world?
Well, I mean, first thing is, all of that kind of complimentary hot vicar or whatever it is, it's all a bit nonsense, right? I don't take it too seriously. If you're looking for that online, you can find that, and you can find people online who are far better looking and who are trying to navigate that. So I try not to allow it to be a thing. Like, I don't really pay much mind to it, to be honest. So I let that go over. It annoys me in terms of if I'm on like a big media stage, like the TV or stuff, and they push the hot vicar thing, because I feel like the media then reduces the content. And I think that people follow me not because I'm hot. They follow me because they like my content. The so-called hotness doesn't hinder that, but it's not the main thing. Right. The main thing is my content, because like I said, there's many better looking people on Instagram than me. So the content is the main thing. The DM stuff, yeah, I've had some dodgy stuff in the past. Been sent stuff, and I get people fishing all the time for me to reply to them. And you have to discern what it is. I've had, things that are overtly like sexualized sent to me, and I've been like, whoa, and immediately, just you block it, you turn it off, you kind of be wise to it, and tell my wife, and she's pretty good, and like block, report, delete, but I don't get that very much anymore, which is good. But what I do get is, it feels like people fishing for me to comment, to draw me into something. So I have to just delete them. I try and remember that anything online is public. Like, I try and remember, like, nothing is secret, and nothing is, in a sense, private. So just remembering that is just a key, and I suppose that comes through the Christian understanding, is, that Christ is ever present, and you're trying to live out that holy life. But yeah, try and be wise to that. And sometimes it's more difficult than other times, and you like just have to be really wise to it and be like, oh, I'm not going to get drawn down that avenue or engage with that. And it's really tough in terms of the stuff people share with you, like from like people talking about self-harm, suicide, their own addictions and problems, and and that's just like, I read all my direct messages, but I reply to 1%, but I read them all, and or I skim read some of the long ones, because sometimes you get essays, and it just reminds me of why what I do is really needed. Like, a lot of people struggling, and often I'll have people talking about how lonely, lost, and suicidal they feel, and they've done this to themselves, or they're harming themselves, and I'll go onto their Instagram, and they'll be fine. The images that they put there are fine, but behind the closed doors, they're really struggling. So yeah, there's a lot that you have to navigate, and I get, I also get a huge amount of praise. I get a huge amount of praise, and I can't trust that. I don't find myself in that. You kind of navigate that, and I actually enjoy. Sounds really morbid, but I enjoy the criticism as well. I enjoy when people think I'm terrible, and I'm a Satan person. Like, there's a guy on YouTube who's made a couple of YouTube videos about me, and It was quite funny because a friend of mine found it, and he's like, "Oh, Chris, I'm really sorry, and praying for you, buddy, and all of this," and said, "I think you should see this," and sent it to me. And I just laughed all the way through. I thought it was hilarious. This guy comparing me to like the spawn of Satan, and my popish tendencies and stuff like this. And I actually found it really complimentary, because he made a video about me with like the Archbishop of York and the Pope, and like it put me on the same level of these guys. And I'm like, fine, criticize me all you want next to Pope Francis. But anyway, it's just quite, you take the good and the bad and you just like let it loose. You can't find yourself in those things.
Yeah. So John Wesley said, "The world is my parish."
Yeah.
And was able to do that because after the Industrial Revolution, and able to travel the world in a way that you never could have done before. And here you are with Instagram. In a way, you've got an online parish. The world is your parish because of technology and social media, and you can reach people's lives. Let me ask you a more personal question, Chris. Going right back to the beginning of this interview, talking about taking after your mother, and you used a phrase. You said you were more prone to an emotional dynamic, and you used the word insecurity several times with me. So I guess I'm asking you, it must be hard for this not to go to your head and not to affect your identity. How do you navigate your insecurities with this newfound fame?
I think in a weird way, God in his grace helped me to discover the Young Franciscans at the same time as he was taking me to social media. So it's really interesting to think that I'm in a way doing this thing that is taking from real history, church history, rooted in spirituality and prayer and the richness of the church from the past. And at the same time, I'm doing this stretching thing, helping the church look to the future. And these things kind of meshing together. So the key is having a depth of prayer, and find, what is my message to the world? It really is about identity. My book is about, a lot of it is about identity. My struggle, I'm an identical twin, right? Identity is huge for me. So my whole life I've been contrasted with my twin, who looks like me, who sounds like me, who's physically the same as me. And so, as an identical, it's like my mum has been sending us photos recently, and I asked her, I said, "Mum, did you always dress us exactly the same?" And she said, "Yeah, I loved it." And I was like, "Right, thanks for that." So my mum dressed us exactly the same, and so I really struggled with that sense of who I was for a long time. And the world that I see today is a world where our life in a sense as humans is in two categories. The first part of your life is figuring out a sense of self, like building your container for life, where you're putting in things and you're figuring out who you are and your place in the world. And if you manage to find that and you do that well, then you move on to the second half in a better way, where in a sense that life is being then deconstructed and thrown and chopped and changed, and real discovery and growth happens. Now, if you don't find that sense of identity in the first half of life, what happens is you never really grow into the second. You don't really grow. And what I'm seeing at the moment in the world is young people who are searching for identity in so many ways and don't have any clue who they are. And at the same time, the other side of that coin is people explicitly over-identifying themselves. I'm this, I'm that. And it's like, that's not who you really are. And this struggle and brokenness with identity is a thing that I've had and I see as a disease of the world, and a sickness in us all. And I really just feel called, or feel like I want to tell people that your identity is found in God, and it is found in what he says about you. And what he says about you is found in Genesis 1, which is, he says 5 times that we're good. This is good, this is good, this is good, this is good, very good. Very good is us. And the church often starts in Genesis 3, and it's like, you sinner, you broken, and like we reduce Jesus to this person who came and died. It's like Jesus died, and it's like, well, he also lived, he also taught, he also spoke about life, and he was resurrected. Anyway, so I was getting into probably a different stream, but my point is like, we're good, you're good, and you loved, and you just lost a sense of who you are. You just forgotten it, or you've not been taught it. And the truth is that you are beautiful and divine, and your deepest self is love and holiness, and you just need to find it. And that is what I feel called to say to young people and the world.
Fantastic. So we're on the home straight. I've got a couple of more things to ask you. I want to talk about COVID and Zoom and church life, and little bit about your book to finish. But just before we go there, let's do one more thing on the whole hot priest thing and talk about the TV series Fleabag.
Oh yeah, sure.
Familiar with it?
Yeah.
And of course, here is this. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen the TV series?
Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, great. So you see the TV series, and then into this TV series comes the hot priest. So this
Andrew Scott, is that his name? Andrew Scott?
I can't remember the actor's name. I always remember him from Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah,
he was fantastic in that as Moriarty. So this priest figure emerges in this atheistic culture. Was he as a I'm going to use the cliche of the hot priest.
Sure.
Were you like, was he believable?
Yeah, I mean, I think whether people recognize it or not, what they loved about him wasn't just his looks, it was his humanity. And I think that is what is really gripping about the series, is you see this guy, this priest, who is honest and vulnerable and broken, and yet is a beautiful struggle that he has with faith in God, and it really comes across, and it's great. It's like the humanity of the priest is seen in him, and I really enjoyed that aspect of him. And I think that is potentially what is attractive about what I do and how I come across, in that there is an aspect of, I could have a beer with him and not feel judged or uncomfortable, and yet also I want to respect him because of what he's chosen to do with his life. So there was an element that, watching him, you saw this vulnerable man trying his best to stay with God and live that life, but also just his foolishness and fleshiness spill out now and again, and it was engaging and fun. And he made jokes that I make, I think like something falls down, a painting falls down or something when they're talking. She's like, I don't believe in God. Boom, painting falls down. He's like, oh, I hate it when he does that. And literally, I've done that like with people. I'm on camera in one of the videos where something fell in the background, and I was like, oh, Lord's telling us something. And so I did feel quite akin to some of the ways that his character came across. But I also felt uncomfortable with some of the things that he did and how he acted, which I don't necessarily see as priestly.
So was there any crossover from him to you? Did people make their way from the TV series doing searches for trendy priests?
I don't know. No. I mean, the media loves to think that there was, and maybe there was, but I think they, when I first started becoming more publicly known and the TV interviews came, people naturally drew that conclusion, that I was, and maybe there were some followers, but ultimately I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Well, I've heard that what's her name spoke about it in an interview on a major one of the big interviewers in America was talking to Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and she brought up, oh, there's a priest in England. He said, the interviewer said to her something along the lines of, how do you feel about making the clergy sexy again? And she was like, oh, I heard about this priest in England who's had these things sent to him and these women. And I was like, because then some fans or some followers, whatever, sent me the link. They were like, she's talking about you. And then there was this comment section, Rev Chris, and it was quite funny to hear her and to hear that she'd heard my story about that happening. But anyway, yeah.
Great. Well, let's talk about COVID, lockdowns, embracing technology for churches. How has doing what you do online under COVID, like, I know that well as a church minister, but what's it been like for you, for your church family this past year?
So for our church locally, in many ways, it's brought blessing in many ways. So we went on Zoom. I didn't want to do streaming. I think there's a big difference between Zoom, where you can see someone and in a sense, there is a sense of embodiment with the person. You can see them and see their reactions, and they can see you. And also you're quite close, right? So in a sermon, I'd be much more back there somewhere, but in Zoom, I'm quite close. You can see my reactions, and my presence does communicate a little bit. So we found that there has been some good engagement with us online. And what has also helped is that people have brought their faith into their home. It's really easy to compartmentalize our faith these days and to step out of our doors, out of our environments, and into a church setting. And then it's like, this is the sacred place here. I'm not saying that's all bad. There's some really good stuff to that, and there's mystery involved, and I think it's great. But what we've done is we've broken a bit of that boundary, and people have brought church into their homes, into their living rooms, into their lounges. They've started opening their space up to, other people from church. So the community has felt like they're sharing a bit more of themselves with the church. And there's been an increased intimacy in some of the conversations and things that the church has shared. So there were some really good things. We also did a really good thing. I felt I was praying. I was like, Lord, what should I do? And how do I do this and reinvent the wheel in a sense? And I decided to set up this thing called Testimonies on Tuesdays, where just invite people in the church to share their stories of faith and like what's been going on in their lives. And that was really good. So on a Tuesday evening, 8 till 9, someone would share about 45 minutes of their life. And that's been really good for the church to engage with each other and to find out each other's story. There's something quite holy about someone sharing their life story. It's intimate and it's real to them. And my understanding of us as created beings is the divine in us. So you're just listening to someone who's sharing something quite holy because they're sharing themselves. Anyway, so that's been really good. And so there's been some good stuff. And instead of having 2 services, we went to 1 service, and that cut out a lot of, how are we going to do this? And it was just like everyone joined together. We're going to do it in this style. And that's been interesting.
Oh. Well, let's finish with your book, The OMG Effect. Hold it up for us again if you can. People see the cover. Nice cover. 60-second sermons. I did think for a book with the subtitle 60-second sermons, I was expecting it to be about 10 pages long. But, that's great. Lovely cover. So 186 pages.
Oh, okay.
Lots of striking things.
How many words is that?
Probably about 80,000. So, just to finish here with you, Chris, on this book, must have been important to you, as all books usually are to authors, aren't they? And in the book, there's a leadership chapter, and you talk about how Jesus ministered when he was interrupted. I actually loved that, the idea that Jesus is singularly focused most of the time and says no to many things, but there are these moments when you see he's interrupted, and you talk about the danger of leaders having overpacked diaries where they can't be interrupted. So, and I see that Jesus was very focused, but he was interruptible. There were those opportunities. So how do you do that with everything that you're doing as a busy parish priest, updating your Instagram, all the other calls that you've got on your life at the minute, from media, conferences, speaking and interviews? How do you cultivate that ability to be interrupted and not miss what God might be doing?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the point, I think I love a lot of his teaching, a lot of his healings, a lot of what we see of Jesus written down about Jesus is these interruptions. He's going from one place to another place, and on that journey, someone says, "Oi," and he goes, "Okay, let's talk." And that is when God steps in, and you see the divinity coming. You know, like the woman being healed of bleeding, Bartimaeus on the road, Zacchaeus. It's just consistently the miracle stories and the healings are when he's been interrupted, and that's when, in a sense, the divine comes in and breaks in a way. And yeah, so I think that it comes from an attitude of having a contemplative outlook. I think what contemplation does, and the spirituality that I try and develop through prayer, is the God in the present, in the now, and that incarnational understanding of God present in the world, in people, through people, in and through things. That you are humble to the setting in which you find yourself, and you're open to the way that God might be moving in that moment. And often it's in the interruption where someone who needs something or says something or knocks on your door, you know, you just, if you allow it, if you're open in that moment, that's when real stuff happens, real things get said. And so I try, so one is having an outlook which tries to be contemplative, God in the present, God in the moment, God in the now, and having that understanding, and giving the time of day to people, you know, seeing them as people. And the second is yeah, I mean, maybe it's just that it's just being present. I love going on just random walks as well, and just seeing what happens, you know, go out on a walk and someone talks or someone gives me, you know, or just listen, you know, just be open to what Spirit might do in that moment. I've been around church leaders who hide behind calendar and the busyness of life, in a way, to me, shows a reduction in trust in the Lord, puts it much more in the lap of us. Some of the way that the Church of England can be criticized at the moment, and I'm not saying that's completely true, but some of it probably sticks, is that we turn towards management systems and operations, when actually it's the embodied present person is really where God moves and takes place. So yeah, again, I mean, it's coming back to that, you know, that incarnational outlook, that Franciscan outlook, which says God is in the world, working in people, in and through people, whether they confess Christ or not. My understanding is that they were made in his image. They haven't lost that. They've just forgotten it, and they just need to be reminded and told of it. And then you see life come when it's named and, I suppose, brought out. So anyway, so yeah, yeah.
Well, we talk minister to minister, pastor to pastor. So I've, you know, like you, everything our church is doing, everything online, the complexity of it, the temptation to fall into more management and busyness. And I got to speak on John 4 recently, the woman at the well, And it really struck me, I noticed. So Jesus is in the midst of political unrest, religious disorder. There's issues of fake news. He's been accused of things that the disciples were doing, baptizing people. And in the middle of all of that, there's no management consultants. There's no massive strategic plan. And in the middle of all that he could have been doing, instead, he goes into Samaria. He's tired, and then has this experience with somebody in the middle of nowhere, a woman at the well that we now consider to be one of the 7 signs in the Gospels that he was the Son of God. And that really struck me in my day-to-day priesting of that. What's God doing? Because it's not where we often think we should give our attention for management and planning and strategy, is it? I mean, does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I mean,
you're like
the arrogance that we have.
Walks.
Yeah, the arrogance that we have. We can identify what God is going to do or where he's going to be is crazy. I think at the beginning of the 20th century or something, there was a big missional meeting in which they said, they made these massive big plans of where God was going to do, what mission was going to do, and how he's going to do it, and none of it happened. It happened in completely the different. It happened in like Pentecostal movements. It happened in Africa and through Asia, and massive spreads of the gospel. And in every avenue where they thought it might come, it didn't. So we need to be present. Jesus tells us to build nets, right, to catch people. And we often just build boats. And the point of the boat was to get us to where the fish were. But we kind of forget that, our place is as fishermen. And we're called to be open to where the Spirit moves. Because you're fishing a long time in one place and Jesus just comes along, goes, throw it on the other side. And it's that catches the fish. It's that movement, that obedience, that listening that helps you go, that's where the catch is. It's not like, all right, I'm going to build a trawling thing and, I'm going to make this boat amazing. It's just like, no, you just need to listen and be obedient to that listening and that humility that comes with open ear to him in the present that says that's where the fish is. And anyway.
Love it. So, music. You've got a suggestion at the beginning of every chapter.
Yeah, the God Pod or whatever I call it.
Yeah, love it. So
yeah, it's quite a funny, quirky thing that I came up with that the publisher was like, oh, that's pretty cool. All right, yeah.
Okay. So music's important to you, yeah?
Everything's important. I love art. I love expression, and again, it's part of my incarnational understanding of the world that it's not like just in Christian music that God speaks. It's in the world and through the trees and plants and artwork and music and film and TV, that at any moment I can sense a pang of truth. I believe where truth is, there is Christ. Where life is, that is Christ speaking. And often I'll be sitting listening to music and be impacted emotionally, and that is Christ just moving something in me, moving some powerful moment of truth. And often it's through more secular music that I'm spoken to, because in that moment it becomes more real, because I'm just open. And then when it happens, it's like, oh yeah, that there's this moment there of truth, and it becomes personal. So I love music. I love listening to music. I love watching films. I love having an open ear to where God might be speaking in and through those things to me. And so as I was writing the book, I decided to create a playlist of music that I was listening to at the time that in some way spoken to me, maybe around the subject that I was about to write about. And I wrote a few things down and put them down.
All right. Well, other writing practices was, how did you write the book? Did you do all in big chunks, little bits every day? What did you learn about writing?
It comes in like different forms. So I had a publishing deal in Korea about 4 years ago. I got a publishing deal. So I wrote basically a book in its bones for that. And then suddenly cut 2 years later, I got loads of book deals. I got basically about 4 publishing houses asked me to write books. And I was like, what? I'm not a writer. I am not a writer. I was like, what is going on? I did not ever think that I was going to write a book. Funny enough, people in the past have given me words who I trust. They go, "You've got a book. There's a book." And I'm like, "Oh, I love you, but you know, you're not listening, because there's no way that I can write." So anyway, it turns out as soon as I started writing, I was like, "Oh, I write a lot of sermons. I can write." And so anyway, I wrote this book for Korea, and then Penguin was one of the people that came along, and I really liked them because they are a secular, massive organization, and they could help me reach people all over the world outside of the Christian tradition. I didn't want to write just a Christian book for Christian bookshops, you know. Like one of my wife's comments was, "It's really sad how you go to a Waterstones and the Christian or the spirituality section is filled up with like just random, you know, a lot of it nonsense, right? And you know, all of the Christian kind of theology and books that I would say have great truth aren't there. They're in Christian bookshops." So it's like, how do we get into this space? And I always feel called to speak into the secular space. So yeah, when Penguin came along, they offered me a good deal and they offered me support writing it. So I had a really good like team. One particular guy who helped me write it. So he had the bones material of what I'd written. And then we had like 20 hours of interviews and chats, and he would help me structure and write, and he would finish it off. So that's how we did it. And yeah.
Brilliant. Anything else you enjoyed about the book, the writing process?
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting coming back to it and reading it every now and again, going, oh yeah, I did write that. That's pretty good. And you're like, where did that come from? Because I feel like, if I'm honest, there is nothing new under the sun, you know, the scripture says. And I don't think that I'm saying anything new. I don't think that I'm communicating anything new. I think this is why, you know, and I'm not trying to be arrogant or whatever. It's just, I believe there are callings on people to say things in certain ways that people listen. And it's not that I'm saying anything different. It's just maybe God has anointed what I say or how I say it in a way that people are able to listen. And that is a gift of grace. And I love that the Lord is using me for that. And so book or media or anything, I'm like, great. But it's just that he's helping, you know, people to hear it. And it's great that people can hear this truth, that they're loved and precious and God is real and true and for them. And yeah, so that's good.
Fantastic. Last question.
Okay.
Any other writing projects? What are you working on at the minute?
Nope.
No.
There is, you know, I mean, if Penguin asks for another book, we'll see. I don't know, but they haven't. And at the moment, I've no major plan to do that. There have been a few potential like TV things and been offered bits and bobs like that, but I'm kind of like, Lord, whatever. I love the church, and in its true form, I love the church when it, you know, serves the poor, when it enables prayer, when it encourages life. You know, those are the aspects of what I see as the beauty of the church. And so I feel for the church. I feel compelled to be in the church. So I'm not running to leave it and become some kind of like, I don't know, minor celebrity or something. But I'm also open to the Spirit. I've always been someone who's an adventurer, who travels, who changes, who, you know, wants to go on these things with God and see where he takes me. And I have a confidence in him, which is given. I love that. And so I look to the future and I'm like, hey, see what happens, you know, that's great. And
well, Chris, if I can conclude, I'm very struck by, at the beginning, you talked about being on this conveyor belt for life. And then you make your first decision that's your own. You go to Africa. You can't have imagined the life that you would be living now back then when you made that decision, could you?
No, I obviously could never say what it would be, but it would be reminisce. I wouldn't be telling the truth if I didn't think, if I always felt, now this sounds weird, right? But the honest truth is, even from an early age, I always felt that I was going to do something big, and I couldn't put my finger on it or know what it was. And my brothers and sisters always laugh at me and, oh, here comes Chris, the one, or take the mick out of me being like Matrix or having some, and I'd have delusions of grandeur or whatever. But there was a whisper that I was going to do something, and it wasn't because I'm this, that, or the other. It's just there's a gravity that is drawing me towards something, and it's still there. So I don't know what it looks like or where it's going, but I know God is good, and I just hope to be used by him, and I feel like I am, and I hope that continues, and we'll see what the future holds. But God is good, and I'm a foolish man who often makes mistakes. That's I don't know, that's it. And whatever, I mean, who knows.
Well, that's fantastic. What a lovely place for us to finish. So thank you, Chris. Worked you hard. Thank you for your openness, your honesty, your vulnerability, and I can certainly see why people want to listen to you, and how God's using you. So thank you, and may your future be full of many opportunities to share that good news in the way that you are.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed that, and we have many other interviews with amazing guests where we listen attentively and respectfully to discover people's backstories through their beliefs and life experiences, and find out what shaped them into who they are and inspires what they do. You can catch all those interviews by liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can find audio versions in your podcast platform of choice: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, etc. Just search Extra ECC. Of course, you can go to extraecc.com and sign up for our newsletter and find all our social media links and more. And by the way, all links are in our show notes below.